Chapter 1171. The third one. Let a piece of history that has been left behind return to the present era. Return, not reappear. The meaning of the two are completely different. It's not sufficient for me to write the true history of the fourth or third epoch and disseminate it to complete the ritual. Klein's right hand, which was holding the fountain pen, paused. He instinctively analyzed the contents of the miracle invoker potion. After some thought, he found something that perfectly matched the ritual's requirements. That was to let the people of the City of Silver escape the forsaken land of the gods and return to the northern and southern continents, allowing this history that had been left behind for 2,000 to 3,000 years return to the present era. This isn't any easier than escaping Amon's pursuit. The only way to leave the forsaken land of the gods is to enter the giant king's court and open the palace where Dark Angel Sasrer is in deep slumber. This is the ancient sun god's negative personality. It's ranked first among the kings of angels and is known as the left hand of God, the deputy of heaven. He might even be stronger than the current Amon. Besides, his current state is being watched by the various deities. Yes, the more controllable aspect of this compared to my escape from Amon is that I can make sufficient preparations. Klein slowly exhaled and felt that there was a certain chance of completing the ritual. In fact, he knew very well that, even without him, the City of Silver would make repeated attempts to open the door to the giant king's residence and find a way to leave this forsaken land. It was as if they were moths darting towards the flames, even at the cost of death. No matter what, with my participation, the chances of success will definitely be higher than what it is now. Klein subconsciously wanted to open the door to the Dark Angel's slumber ground to attract Amon, creating chaos to offset the damage caused by the Dark Angel's awakening. This was a tactic he was rather familiar with. However, he eventually rejected this idea because it was too dangerous. After spending some time with Amon and finally seeing the level of a king of angels, Klein instinctively began to fear these terrifying existences. He no longer wanted to use the conflict between them to create chaos. Just their existence alone could cause irreparable damage to the surrounding Beyonders and the entire region. Under such circumstances, trying to rely on them to create a chaotic situation was no longer tottering on the edge of the abyss. If one wasn't careful, they would fall into the abyss and into eternal damnation. Therefore, it was best not to try. Unless he had no other solution, to the point of escaping being just his wishful thinking, Klein didn't want to make such an attempt. Indeed, a portion of a miracle invoker's Beyonder powers comes from history, which is why there's a ritual requirement like this. How did the other scholars of your complete it? Looking at the parchment on the long bronze table, he thought of a possible solution from another angle. If it were me, the only solution I can think of is to isolate some people or history from reality. Only when they are forgotten will I allow them to return to the present era. This might take centuries, or even longer. What an evil act. Heh, it reminds me of the peach blossom spring. Those people living in utopia away from the outside world share some characteristics. After some thought, Klein believed that the difficulty of this ritual for scholars of yore was whether they could survive until the ritual was held. Furthermore, there were too many accidents that could interrupt self-isolation like that. The forsaken land of the gods has perfectly resolved these issues, but it also brings with it greater problems. Dark Angel Sasrer. What is the condition of this heaven's deputy right hand now? Is it related to the resurrection of the ancient sun god? The level involved in such a matter has already reached the ceiling of this world. Why am I always involved in such matters? Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh. He could roughly guess that this was due to the destiny Sapphira Castle brought him. After all, blasphemer Amon was unwilling to shoulder such a destiny. Retracting his wandering thoughts, he focused his attention back onto the miracle invoker potion formula. The worm of star is from the apprentice pathway. The supplementary ingredients contain 3 high-grade spiritual materials of the 3 neighboring pathways. I've already made the worms of time into fate siphon charms. There's no way to restore them. Let Leonard's grandpa lend me another one. How can that be called lending? I'm going to use the upgraded version of a yesterday once more charm to exchange for it. Where should I find the Worm of Star? There aren't many demigods from the apprentice pathway that live in the real world. The Aurora Order's Saint of Secrets, Bodhi's. However, I'm stuck in the forsaken land of the gods and can't deal with him. All I can do is ask Ma'am Hermit and Queen Mystic for help. At the same time, I have to urge Miss Magician to become a traveler as soon as possible. Yes, I can also get her to ask her teacher where worms of cosmos might be. There's actually only one main ingredient. It's either the heart of the dark demonic wolf or the Beyonder characteristic produced by other miracle invokers. It's no longer two as one. Yes, that also means that, at this level, there are very few scattered characteristics. They've all gathered. The dark demonic wolf is also known as the god of wishes. That's a standard angel, a subsidiary god. If I can't find any materials that can be used, wouldn't I be slaying a god? The level of an angel can already be considered a hidden existence. There's a fundamental difference from being a sequence 3. Just thinking about it makes me scared. After making a list of helpers that he could rope in, he felt a lot more at ease. He had a feeling that he no longer feared his debts when they reached a significant amount. He lifted his right hand that was holding the fountain pen, and he continued to record what he had previously learned. Most of this was something he already knew, and he could only use it as a reminder. Finally, he wrote down incomplete information in the corner of the parchment. Sequence 1, Attendant of Mysteries, Main Ingredients, 1 Attendant of Mysteries Beyonder characteristic. This piece of information meant that Sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics were difficult to obtain through other means, with only 3 to choose from. One of them is on the half-fool on the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range. It's with the uniqueness. The other is with Zeradol. There's still one more. According to what Leonard said, the true creator has clues to its location. Where could it be? Yes, Little Sun and the rest had hunted shapeshifters in the northern city ruins, Noise. There seems to be a high-level existence of the seer pathway lurking there. I wonder if it corresponds to Miracle Invoker or Attendant of Mysteries. Klein gradually had a thought, and he planned on visiting Noise for a preliminary investigation after he resurrected and escaped Amon. After digesting the knowledge he had gained, he summoned his golden pocket watch from the junk pile and opened it to check the time. Before he destroyed the Blood Emperor's ruin, he had sacrificed many things that he didn't need in battle, above the grey fog to prevent any damage. Despite that, he still lost quite a bit after the battle and his eventual suicide. Furthermore, they were all extremely valuable. Just the thought of it made him almost lose control. Grozel's Travels, Death Knell, Creeping Hunger, Fate Siphon Charm, Flaring Sun Charms, Marionette Konas and his equipment, Marionette Inuni and his 2 rings, and the Adventurer's Harmonica. No, I can't think about it anymore. Thankfully, I had thrown Azek's copper whistle above the grey fog ahead of time. Thankfully, I can still summon the historical void projections of these items. They're just accompanying me in a different form. Probably not for Grozel's Travels. Klein's temples throbbed as he couldn't help but feel heavy. He sighed and seriously mourned over the items, especially the mystical item that had accompanied him for a long time, Creeping Hunger. After a long silence, Klein forced his attention back to the present. As he waited for the tarot gathering to begin, he casually thought about the ancient sun god and the other matters such as Chernobyl. Suddenly, he frowned slightly. Since this is my hometown, there have never been transmigrators. They're all ancient humans that were released by Sapphira Castle. Then, do places like the Chaos Sea also have similar existences? Was Chernobyl converted into a sanctuary? According to what Amon said, and what I saw in my divination, the ancient sun god had indeed woken up in Chernobyl. Then, is he a transmigrator released from Sapphira Castle, or a survivor of a sanctuary? If it's the latter, who's the third person inside the cocoon? Upon thinking of this, Klein was alarmed as his pupils dilated slightly. He already had a certain guess about the history of the elves. It likely had nothing to do with Sapphira Castle. This way, he still couldn't find the correct corresponding identity of the third, or more correctly, the first, transmigrator. This transmigrator didn't seem to leave behind any traces in history. Without any hesitation, Klein's consciousness sank into the grayish-white fog. With the power of Sapphira Castle, he came directly to a certain part of history that was relatively distant. It was made up of many fragments of light, and the clearest one was the suspended Zhou Mingrue above the Door of Light. And beside Zhou Mingrue, the corresponding fog of history was instantly lit up due to his sufficient knowledge of Roselle. He saw a young man who also had his eyes tightly shut in the cocoon. There was no need to verify it. Through that sense of familiarity and spiritual intuition, he confirmed that this was the former incarnation of Emperor Roselle Gustave, Huang Tao. Without bothering to appreciate the emperor's true appearance, Klein turned his gaze to the other side. There was a transparent cocoon there, and the figure inside could vaguely be seen. As he had already seen the other hanged figures, he had lit up many fragments of light in the fog of history. They interweaved and stimulated each other, barely allowing him to see the fuzzy area. The figure inside was obviously a woman. Female. A thought came to his mind as he realized that he had missed a direction when he analyzed the transmigrator. Transmigrators had an objective mindset. They could completely control themselves and not leave any traces that exceeded the times, but there was one thing that couldn't be avoided. It was very obvious that Sapphira Castle was related to the three pathways related to the seer, apprentice, and marauder. After the birth of a transmigrator, they had to quickly make a connection with one of these three pathways. Not only was Klein involved in the case brought about by the Antigonus family's notebook, but he also quickly had the opportunity to choose the seer potion. In Intis, where Roselle was active, there was the secret order, and he got to know Zeradal early on. According to this logic, the ancient sun god with the marauder authority was indeed one of the reasonable suspects. Klein immediately conjured a pen and paper and began listing the corresponding names he knew at the moment. For example, fourth epoch people from the Antigonus, Zeradal, and Abraham family, or the kings of angels surrounding the ancient sun god. Before long, Klein's gaze stopped on a few names. The first person was none other than the ancient god, Phlegria, who clearly had the authority of seer. Behind him was his subsidiary god. The god of the dead, Salinger, and the goddess of misfortune, Ammonises. The latter was also known as the Evernight goddess. Chapter 1172, Unperturbed / Bia. Klein stared at the parchment in front of him for a long time without moving. After a while, he gently tapped the edge of the long model table, causing all the items that he conjured to disappear. He summoned his golden pocket watch and opened it to take a look. He sent a message to Little Sun, informing him to prepare to participate in the tarot gathering. About 1,000 heartbeats later, dark red beams of light rose from the two sides of the long bronze table, condensing into different figures on different high-back chairs. Without any gaps in time, all the members of the tarot club looked at the figure sitting at the very end who was shrouded in grey fog. Seeing that Mr. Fool wasn't wearing a monocle, Leonard inwardly heaved a sigh of relief. Then, he turned around and looked at the bottom of the long, model table to confirm the situation of the world Klein Moretti. Similar to him, Catlia, Audrey, and Furs instinctively turned their attention to the world Gehrman Sparrow after seeing Mr. Fool. One of them knew that the world was in a dangerous situation and could only seek Mr. Fool's blessings. Another had failed to receive any feedback for 2 days, and she suspected that Gehrman Sparrow had really been embroiled in the matter regarding George III, with something definitely having happened during that time. The final one knew that George III's matter was extremely risky, and was a little worried that Mr. World would suffer serious injuries. Seeing that the World Gehrman sparrow was perfectly fine without any abnormalities, Audrey retracted her gaze, curtsied, and bowed towards the end of the long bronze table. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." With the world situation becoming even more chaotic, she felt a little comforted by the fact that the Tarot Club could still maintain its original state. This significantly improved her mood. After the Tarot Club members bowed under Miss Justice's lead, the Fool Klein nodded slightly, indicating for everyone to sit down. Then, he slowly surveyed the area and smiled. "It seems all of you were very concerned whether today's tarot gathering would proceed as usual." Upon hearing this, Alger's heartbeat sped up as he heard thumping sounds. Without a doubt, he believed that Mr. Fool was referring to him, and was giving him a gentle punishment. In other words, he had given him a chance to repent. Alger lowered his head and said with a trembling voice, "We weren't pious enough and thought too much." Why is Mr. Hanged Man apologizing on my behalf?" Furs, who had instructed Zio to ask Mr. Fool if the tarot gathering would proceed as scheduled, was stunned for a moment before she gave up on thinking. She then turned to the end of the long bronze table and lowered her head. She repeated, "We weren't pious enough and thought too much. So I wasn't the only one who prayed to Mr. Fool over the past few days. Mr. Hanged Man claims to have overthought things because there was a possibility that the tarot gathering would be cancelled, causing him to have some unnecessary speculations? But Furs shouldn't have thought of that." Audrey looked across the table and then to her sides, feeling enlightened. The Fool nodded and looked around again. Such concern is considered normal. He laughed and sighed. "I've recently used the world's body to play a game with Amon in the Forsaken Land of the Gods. Thankfully, we didn't have to skip this tarot gathering." Everything he said was the truth, but what the others would decipher from this information was definitely far from the actual situation. And this way, even if the news of the World Gehrman sparrow being equal to the Fool was released, the members of the Tarot Club would only sneer in their hearts that Amon was trying his deceitful tricks again. To have a period of time that the world was equal to the Fool didn't necessarily mean that the world was always equal to the Fool. A portion of the truth was also a lie. Played a game with Amon. Old Man's guess was right. Mr. Fool was deliberately using Klein to bait blasphemer Amon. From the looks of it, he had obtained a rather satisfactory outcome, allowing Amon to suffer a terrible loss. Leonard, who had long come up with speculations, felt that this was completely in line with his expectations and didn't doubt Mr. Fool's words at all. Mr. Fool didn't reply for 15 minutes because he was in a critical moment battling Amon. He has already recovered to such a state. Audrey was pleasantly surprised and shocked when she heard that. For some reason, she felt a strong sense of honor. Alger could also tell from Mr. Fool's words that he had taken another step towards his recovery. He was actually able to hold the upper hand against a king of angels. This made him even more frustrated at himself for having doubts and testing the Fool. Mr. Fool had hinted in advance that the tarot gathering might be cancelled because he had long predicted that there would be a conflict between him and Amon. In fact, it's even possible that he had taken the initiative to create this episode by setting up a trap for Amon. Alger instantly made many connections and felt that there was no way he could hide his thoughts in front of such a high-level existence. He warned himself once again, "I can't do such things again." So Mr. World didn't provide any feedback because his body was being used by Mr. Fool to resist Amon. That king of angels, Amon, is truly powerful. Mr. Fool actually needed to personally take action. Furs and Zio exchanged looks, not having any more doubts about their previous questions. Katlia roughly understood the reason why the world had disappeared. She also guessed that the messenger who had the contractual ties with the world likely wasn't able to enter the Forsaken Land of the Gods. At the same time, she was surprised by the appearance of a king of angels appearing on stage in the present times. She felt that this was one of the signs of the apocalypse. Emlyn wasn't aware of what happened recently. He merely looked at everyone with a somewhat blank look. For some baffling reason, he felt that he had been locked behind Cheney's gate for far more than a week or two. Perhaps it had been a month or two, to the point that he felt like he no longer had a grasp over the current situation. Mr. World has come to the forsaken land of the gods. Did Mr. Fool use his body to engage in a battle with that terrifying Amon? Derek was first alarmed before he felt a strong sense of joy. This meant that the City of Silver's next exploration would receive tremendous help. He immediately looked towards the end of the long bronze table, and he blurted out, "Honorable Mr. Fool, the chief wishes to receive your blessings for a ritual. Are you agreeable to such a request?" Having long learned of this from his prayers, Klein nodded slightly and said, "Sure." After receiving his promise, Derek couldn't help but smile. For a moment, he didn't know how to express his gratitude. 2 seconds later, he lowered his head and said loudly, "My faith lies only with Mr. Fool." The fool nodded and turned to look at Ma'am Hermit. He warmly said, "What questions do you have this time?" The Queen didn't say anything in her letter." Catlia was taken aback as she decided to first ask something she wanted to know. After all, she could still ask several questions. She deliberated for 2 seconds before saying, "Honorable Mr. Fool, what's the truth behind George III's death?" The moment the hermit said that, Justice Audrey and company immediately focused their attention. This was exactly what they wanted to know. Amongst them, the star Leonard had a certain level of understanding over the matter. He was more concerned about the deeper reason behind this incident. And among the members of the Tarot Club, the only one who was more confused about the situation was Emlyn. His mind was filled with thoughts like, what, and what happened? He hadn't even read the newspapers recently, so he didn't know that King George III had been assassinated. As for the son, although he wasn't sure why George III died for no reason, he didn't care at all. The fool Klein smiled and said calmly, George III wanted to become the Black Emperor. And for this reason, he dug up the Tudor ruins, engaged in human trafficking, and created the Great Smog of Backland. He initiated a war, allowing the Fasak airships to bombard Backland. Unfortunately, he failed at the final ritual, and the secret mausoleum he needed for the ritual was destroyed. He briefly described the entire incident in the calmest tone he could make, doing so without mentioning what he had done. It would be beneath Mr. Fool to explain the situation on his own accord. The Great Smog of Backland. The airship raid. This was all done by George III to become a god. Audrey's eyes widened as she instantly recalled the two things she had experienced before. Suddenly, she understood why the world Gehrman Sparrow wanted to stop George III from becoming a god. She knew that he was a gentle and kind gentleman, and he would definitely not allow the culprit behind these two tragic cases to go scot-free. If it were me, I would also have thought of doing so, but I would hesitate and be stopped by the possibility of ill developments. As for Mr. World, he is firm and decisive. This is a matter that involves the deities. Yes, there should also be the will of Mr. Fool in this matter. Audrey glanced at the world Gehrman Sparrow, who was sitting silently at the other end of the long, mottled table. She nodded slightly to express her agreement. Black Emperor. George III wished to become a god? This. Yes, Mr. Fool has the Black Emperor card of blasphemy. Gehrman Sparrow was previously investigating the matter of the Great Smog and human trafficking. Indeed, all of these are connected together. There was actually such a secret hidden behind it. From the looks of it, Mr. Fool's goal has been achieved. His plan has succeeded. Therefore, he has taken one more step towards his recovery. He can now face off with a king of angels head-on. The more Alger thought about it, the more fearful and spirited he became. He felt that, despite knowing of some clues ahead of time, he was completely unaware of Mr. Fool's setup. Amidst the shock experienced by Leonard, Furs, and the other members of the Tarot Club, Catlia, who already had a premonition, suppressed her emotions and decided to ask another question. Honorable Mr. Fool, what's the attitude of the 7 deities regarding this matter? Chapter 1173 Advice/Be a Good Question. The fool Klein inwardly praised her, and he explained by using the Red Angel Evil Spirit's explanation in his own words. The 7 deities wish to have a Black Emperor, but they are not unanimous in their candidate for the Black Emperor. When George III successfully obtained the ticket to becoming one through secret preparations, the 7 deities had no choice but to accept it, regardless of whether they approved of him or not. So that's the situation. Apart from the Moon Emlyn and the Sun Derek, the other members of the Tarot Club were enlightened. They roughly understood why the churches acted in a rather contradictory manner when faced with the tragedies of the Great Smog of Backland, the deaths caused by the Faysation air raid, and George III's assassination. Following that, they suddenly had a question. Since George III had already made preparations and had reached the final step of carrying out the ritual while obtaining the tacit approval of the 7 deities, why would he fail? They immediately thought of an answer, because Mr. Fool didn't agree to it. In the destruction of George III's Black Emperor ritual, the churches probably didn't do anything to stop it. Perhaps, they even provided some help to Mr. Fool's subordinates. Did the Church of the Lord of Storms make use of this chaos to secretly do something? No, they likely wouldn't conceal it too much. Leonard recalled all the details he had previously discovered, and he was confident of his grasp over the overall situation. The 7 deities' tacit approval. Mr. Fool vetoed it and sent the World and Other Blessed to secretly destroy George III's apotheosis ritual. But what has this got to do with the Queen? Why did she discover that Gairman Sparrow has gone missing? Black Emperor. The Queen might have participated in the operation led by Mr. Fool, and later, discovered that a participant had gone missing. Cadlia made a guess at the truth through her rich knowledge and insight. And at this moment, Emlyn had just managed to make heads and tails of the discussions that had just been discussed, and he managed to understand the developments outside during his time in protective custody. George III had secretly plotted to become a god and received the 7 deities' tacit approval. In the end, Mr. Fool's blessed destroyed his ritual, causing him to die on the spot. Seeing that everyone was silent, the fool Klein looked at the hermit Cadlia and said, "Any other questions?" "There's nothing else this time." Cadlia bowed her head even lower. She was more respectful than before towards the mighty figure at the end of the long bronze table. Although she had long known that Mr. Fool had the Snake of Fate, Death Consul, an ancient bane under him, and was in secret control of the life school of thought, she still never expected that the powers Mr. Fool could mobilize in the real world were able to destroy a king's apotheosis ritual. Furthermore, he had foiled a plot of a king of angels, the son of the Creator. Mr. Fool's hidden forces are more exaggerated than I imagined. What effect do the members of the Tarot Club exert on him? A backing faction? Individual growth? Or is it just a backup plan? Cadlia instantly thought of many things and momentarily forgot that she was already a Sequence 4 demigod. No matter which organization she was in, she was considered a member of the upper echelons. Just the feats displayed by Mr. Fool is enough to make a saint lack confidence. Justice Audrey only took a glance at Ma'am Hermit before she interpreted her mental state. At this moment, the fool Klein nodded. "You may begin." Upon hearing this, Leonard immediately turned to the other end of the long, model table and said to the world, "How's your situation now?" Furs, Zio, Audrey, and the other members of the Tarot Club also cast their gazes over, expressing their concern for the World Gairman Sparrow's situation. From their point of view, Mr. World, who was stuck between Mr. Fool and Angel of Time Amon as a combat tool, was probably in a bad situation. His survival meant that he was already considered lucky enough. Feeling the varied concern, Klein controlled the world and chuckled hoarsely. "Not too bad, but not too good either. It's all thanks to Mr. Fool's grace that I finally obtained a secret from Amon, but I haven't completely escaped from his grasp. Without waiting for everyone to respond, he continued, I'm currently in a rather sticky situation. I relied on Mr. Fool's powers to enter a certain concealed state and temporarily extricate myself from Amon's grasp. However, if I were to dispel this state and return to the real world, I'll only find myself back where my body is. And it's very likely that Amon is still loitering nearby. I would like to make an attempt at finding a solution. I wonder what your opinions are regarding this matter? The meaning behind the World Gehrman Sparrow's words was very clear. He wanted to rely on himself first, leaving Mr. Fool's help as a last resort. And his actual meaning was essentially the same, find a way to bypass the restrictions first. And in the case that his solution didn't really work, then he would consider living in the state of being undead. Solution? Alger and company were suddenly a little excited because the suggestions they provided would be used to fight against a king of angels. If they were employed and were of use, then this would be a proud moment in their life, one that would remain for the rest of their lives. Audrey was just about to speak in excitement when she retracted her words. This was because she knew that she couldn't give random suggestions, otherwise, it could lead to Mr. World getting caught by Amon. Xiao thought about it seriously and realized that she couldn't come up with any useful suggestions. She could only choose to observe and learn. Must it be where your body originally was? Do you have any blood or hair that was kept elsewhere? Alger thought for a moment and gave a suggestion using a question. The fool Klein thought for a moment and made the world shake his head. No. Compared to his original body, a single tube of blood was too little. Thinking of this, Klein suddenly had an idea. Perhaps he could use those 2 tubes of blood as ingredients, combining them with other methods, using alchemical life to create a new body. There are 2 problems. Firstly, alchemical life requires the spirit body's involvement, otherwise, the final product might not be considered my body. Secondly, I don't know any demigods who can complete alchemical life. The only one barely related to them is Frank Lee. Will I end up becoming a mushroom man? Then, I'd be better off as an undead. As Klein thought about it, he nearly shivered. After the hanged man's suggestion was rejected, the hermit Katlia set off from her knowledge of mysticism. She deliberated and asked, do you have a sequence 3 sealed artifact? Why do you ask? The world asked. A sequence 3 sealed artifact can respond to prayers within a certain range. You can make use of that, Katlia explained simply. Klein roughly understood what Ma'am Hermit was thinking. You're talking about descent? That's right. Get someone to set up a descent ritual at the periphery, and you should be able to respond to it in your own concealed state. Katlia first glanced at the sun and described the specific plan. Then, she realized something as she asked, do you really have a sequence 3 sealed artifact? She originally wanted the world to seek Mr. Fool's bestowment. I'm already a sequence 3 beyonder, Klein replied simply as he controlled the world. The members of the Tarot Club were momentarily speechless. They knew very well that Mr. World must have advanced to sequence 4 at the end of June to become a demigod. And now, it was December of the same year. The Queen once said that using the blood of the Snake of Fate to advance would make it easier for me to become a sequence 3 clairvoyant than others. Besides, the Tarot Club has given me plenty of precious mysticism knowledge. It has greatly helped me digest the potion. But even so, I still need another half a year before I have a chance of attempting to reach sequence 3. The hermit Katlia subconsciously looked around and discovered that the other members wore stupefied and envious looks. She sighed silently and said, is my suggestion useful, Mr. World? The World Gehrman Sparrow shook his head. There is a huge restriction when responding in that state. Once he chose to descend, it would mean that he would begin the rest of his life, no, afterlife, as an undead. Perhaps, I can combine the 2 methods. Yes, I can use the method of praying to the Fool, sea god, or protector of magic and drama performers to leave the forsaken land of the gods, but that's not urgent. It's too easy to reveal the truth. The fool Klein made the world look at the star Leonard while in thought. Leonard instantly understood what he meant. He tersely acknowledged. I'll go back and do some research to see if there are any other ideas. Clearly, his true intention was to ask Old Man when he was back. He was an angel who knew Amon rather well. Perhaps, he could come up with suggestions that no one else could think of. This was the answer that Klein wanted. He immediately made the world say, okay. After the discussion of how to escape his predicament came to an end, the world German Sparrow looked at Furs. Help me ask the Abraham family if they still have any worms of cosmos that have yet to lose their spirituality. If there are, what will be the price for the exchange? A worm of star was a high-level spiritual material. Most of the time, it didn't contain any beyonder characteristics. Therefore, their spirituality would suffer an irreversible loss. Without any special methods, it would be difficult to preserve it for too long. Worms of cosmos. Furs was taken aback before she nodded. All right. After receiving an answer, Klein made the world cast his gaze at the hermit Katlia. If Miss Magician isn't able to exchange for a worm of star from the Abraham family, I would like to entrust you with a mission. What mission? Katlia asked with interest. The world said with a smile, hunt the Aurora Order's Saint of Secrets, Bodhi's. Chapter 1174 Joint Operation The Aurora Order's Saint of Secrets, Bodhi's. Mr. World wants to hunt him? Furz's first reaction was that she had heard wrongly. After all, German Sparrow had no connection to the Saint of Secrets. However, she quickly had a rough idea from the worm of star that had just been mentioned. This made her suddenly excited and thrilled. This was because she also wanted to hunt the Saint of Secrets, Bodhi's, to avenge her teacher's family. However, due to her lacking strength and the inability to pay for it, she had kept this thought to herself. Although it sounds like Mr. World doesn't plan on personally taking action, Ma'am Hermit is also a Sequence 4 demigod, and she has the support of that Queen Mystic behind her. I can provide the utmost support within my abilities. As her thoughts raced, Furs cast her gaze at the hermit beside her, waiting for her reply. After some thought, Katlia said, Bodhi's is very likely a saint of the apprentice pathway. It's very difficult to hunt him. Besides, he has the Rose Redemption backing him and the True Creator's protection. With my current level, it's almost impossible for me to complete this mission solely on my own. You can seek the help of Queen Mystic. I will also arrange for other partners for you. Klein made the world German Sparrow reply in a low and hoarse voice, the reward is the right to choose the spoils of war first, and mysticism knowledge that will allow you to digest the potion within this year. It's December. Katlia's heart palpitated when she heard that. She deliberated and said, when the time comes, I will try, but I cannot guarantee success. No matter how difficult the mission of hunting the Saint of Secrets was, it couldn't be as dangerous as accepting the knowledge injection process from the hidden sage. And as for the mysticism knowledge provided by the latter, they didn't necessarily aid in digestion. There was a high probability that it included mathematics, machinery, and literature. No problem. As long as you do it seriously, I'll still compensate you with the mysticism knowledge even if you fail in the end. The world nodded and confirmed the deal. At this moment, Furs finally couldn't help but speak out, Mr. World, Ma'am Hermit, can I join this mission? I might be able to provide some help. Even if you didn't, I would have gotten you too. The fool Klein secretly laughed and made the world nod gently. There's a spot reserved for you in this mission. Furs wasn't surprised at all. She asked curiously, what can I do? What do you need me to do? German Sparrow replied in an extremely calm tone, bait. Furs opened her mouth, momentarily at a loss for words. She had a feeling that she knew that this would happen. The world German Sparrow continued, similarly, you also have the right to choose the spoils of war. You'll be just after Ma'am Hermit. Also, during this period of time, I can help you record beyonder powers like traveling. Furs had never expected a reward, as it was her greatest reward to be able to exact revenge successfully. In the future, she might even receive additional rewards from her teacher. Without any hesitation, she nodded and said, "Okay." The world immediately cast his gaze towards Miss Justice. "How's the digestion of your Dreamwalker potion?" Thanks to the expedition into Groselle's travels and the persistence she had put into her acting, the speed at which she digested the potion was very fast. Her eyes darted around as she thought for a moment. "I've already concluded the acting principles. In another 2 to 3 months, I should be able to completely digest it. It's a little slow." Klein mumbled inwardly as he made the world say, "Create more opportunities to act. If you can digest the potion before Ma'am Hermit attacks the Saint of Secrets, I can give you Vin Rambise's Beyonder characteristic ahead of time as payment so that you can join in on the operation." Klein believed that he would have to stay in the forsaken land of the gods for a very long time. Most of the matters in the outside world could only be interfered with through the members of the Tarot Club. It was also beneficial for him to increase their strength as soon as possible. Furthermore, he wasn't directly giving it to her. The difficulty of hunting the Saint of Secrets bodies was just as Katlia had said. It was rather difficult. All right. Audrey was just fretting over how she could accumulate more credit with Mr. World. Therefore, she naturally agreed without any hesitation when she heard his offer. In her heart, the members of the Aurora Order were lunatics and destructive maniacs. There was no need to find a reason to deal with them. In addition, Audrey had previously been troubled by her lack of experience as a Beyonder. This gave her a chance. Although it was rather dangerous, it was still an opportunity. Gehrman Sparrow sure is generous. To provide the knowledge that can help a mysticologist digest the potion and a sequence 4 demigod characteristic. This shouldn't only be for the Worm of Star. It sounds like a supplementary material. He's helping the members of the Tarot Club improve as quickly as possible according to Mr. Fool's will, so as to be effective in the future? Alger listened to the world's conversation with the other members and vaguely grasped a certain truth. This made him rather vexed. He suspected that if he hadn't lacked faith and had other thoughts, to the point of foolishly testing Mr. Fool, he might have already been assigned a mission that could aid him in pushing open the door of godhood. At that moment, Justice, who had agreed to the request, glanced at the magician and said with a faint smile, "I'm looking forward to the Abraham family not having any Worm of Star." "Me too." Furs nodded seriously, indicating that she had the same thoughts. Seeing that the world was done speaking, Katlia thought for a moment and said to Judgment, "Do you want to join this mission? Do some intelligence gathering on the periphery. Your ability in this area left a deep impression on me." Even without Ma'am Hermit's invitation, Zio wouldn't refuse in helping her friend. She nodded gently and said, "I don't have a problem if the operation is in Backlund. If it's somewhere else, my role would be greatly discounted." A sheriff and their own area of jurisdiction were always connected. The more familiar they were with the place, the better they could showcase their abilities. Once they exceeded that range, they could only rely on their Beyonder powers. "Your reward is being third to choose the spoils of war." Katlia looked at the star once again. "If there's a need, I hope you can allow the official factions to appear at the right moment." Leonard chuckled. "I hope you don't have to go that far. My reward shall also be a spoil of war. If my dear poet friend here wasn't invited in the end, then the mission of hunting the Saint of Secrets would have nearly become a sorority for the female members of the Tarot Club." The fool Klein muttered inwardly as he made the world Gehrman Sparrow finalize the matter. All that was left was to wait for the Abraham family's feedback. Following that, Alger and Derek reached a rental arrangement for the unshadowed crucifix. Just as they entered the free exchange segment, Emlyn couldn't help but look towards the end of the long bronze table. "Honorable Mr. Fool, can you give me a hint?" How should I escape protective custody? The fool, who was shrouded in the grey fog, nodded slightly and said simply, this week. His answer was said with great confidence, but it wasn't a prophecy, but a judgment of the situation. The current situation had Fasak and Intis attacking Lone, while Fainapotter was attacking Lone's allies, Lenberg, Mason, etc. The three churches definitely didn't wish to suffer any damage the Sanguine could bring while already having existing enemies. Therefore, Emlyn would be released very soon, but it was hard to say for Father Yatravsky. Similarly, the Sanguine's focus would definitely be shifted to the global situation. It was unlikely for them to have the motivation to continue probing Emlyn and his other partners. In addition, in the past 2 days, the one whose reason for praying was the most forced, apart from Zio, was Emlyn White. Klein suspected that he had been locked in the basement of St. Samuel Cathedral all this time because it was convenient for the goddess to exert her influence on him. Now that the matter had ended, he was no longer of any use. Combined with the three factors, it wasn't difficult to conclude that Emlyn would be free in no time. The only exception was that if this fellow had really been forgotten. Be it the Church of Evernight or the Sanguine, they had forgotten that there was such a fellow locked behind Cheney's gate. If that was the case, Klein would get the Star Leonard to provide him with some assistance. Emlyn heaved a sigh of relief and sincerely thanked Mr. Fool. At the end of the free exchange, the World Gehrman Sparrow suddenly looked at the Hanged Man. You said that you've already arrived on Sonia Island and are inside the primitive forest. Yes, Alger replied in puzzlement. Gehrman Sparrow pondered for a moment. You can try to seek out an elven ruin. Perhaps you might chance upon some sort of opportunity. Alger suddenly thought of the Book of Calamity and the scenes he had seen in his dream. He nodded thoughtfully and said, all right. After another round of exchanges, the tarot gathering came to an end. Audrey and company stood up and bowed before leaving the world above the grey fog. After returning to his body, Leonard immediately lowered his voice and described Klein's predicament. Finally, he said, old man, do you have any good suggestions? My suggestion? I think it's better to ask the fool for help, Palaz Zoroast replied without any hesitation. Leonard coughed lightly and said, aren't you going to use this opportunity to make things difficult for Amon? Chapter 1175 Ideas are very important. Making things difficult for Amon? Palaz Zoroast chuckled. What benefits can there be? Otherwise, forget it. Leonard was momentarily at a loss for words. After a few seconds, he said, at least it can make you feel good. Palaz chuckled. I will feel better if you don't bring this topic up. Without waiting for Leonard to respond, this sequence one angel from the Marauder pathway sighed with his slightly aged voice. Doesn't your former colleague have a deceit charm? Perhaps he can use this to come up with a solution. After getting rid of the Amon avatars in Backlund, Palaz had given the godhood symbols and magic labels needed to make 4 charms, deceit, parasite, deprivation, and aging, to Leonard. Leonard had passed on this knowledge to Klein, and the latter had used the knowledge and the worms of time to create 1 deceit, parasite, and deprivation bullet each. Later on, he had used them to deal with Kona's Kilgore, but Leonard wasn't aware of this. Leonard whispered thoughtfully, old man, are you saying that by using the deceit charm, you can mislead Amon and cause him to misidentify the location, preventing him from influencing Klein's escape? In his mind, Palaz Zoroast snapped back, do you think it's possible to use a deceit charm in front of a Marauder Pathways King of Angels? It's impossible. Leonard laughed dryly and pressed in a thick-skinned manner, what do you mean then? Palaz Zoroast's voice suddenly sounded more spirited, deceive the rule that one can only return to where one's body is. Deceive the rule? That works too? Leonard asked in shock. Palaz gave a self-deprecating laugh and sighed. Compared to deceiving Amon, deceiving a rule is much easier. After all, underneath this world is madness and chaos. This sentence made Leonard speechless for a moment. On the one hand, he wasn't experienced enough. He didn't know that orders and laws could be deceived, and on the other hand, he never expected that, in Old Man's heart, Amon was even more terrifying than the laws of nature and the order of the world. After nearly 10 seconds, he spoke again. With this method, how high is the possibility of success? It's very, very low, Palez said with a sneer. However, the probability of deceiving the order of the world like this with a deceit charm made from a worm of time from Amon's avatar is very, very low. Therefore, my suggestion is still to get him to make a request to the fool for help. Don't waste any more time. When fighting Amon, the longer the delay, the more dangerous it will be. Leonard pondered for a moment before nodding in agreement. I understand. I'll also advise him to do so. Of course, he wouldn't forget mentioning the highly improbable method that Old Man had suggested. It's good that you understand. Seriously, disturbing an old man's reading, as Palez mumbled, his voice gradually lowered and disappeared from Leonard's mind. In 7 Pinster Street, the newspaper that was placed on the coffee table suddenly flew up and automatically spread open over the sofa. Using a deceit charm to deceive the requirement that I can only resurrect ere my original body is? Above the grey fog, in the ancient palace, Klein reconstructed Palez Zorost's suggestion, in his own words. As soon as he finished speaking, he recalled the animal hide lantern that kept burning. Amon had deceived the laws of nature, allowing the candle to remain in a magical state and continue burning for a week without needing any fuel. His eyes lit up as he whispered, "This line of thought is something only an angel from the Marauder pathway can think of immediately. It might not be impossible." Like Palez, he did feel that, compared to dealing with Amon, it was much easier to deal with the laws of nature. After seeing Hope, he immediately analyzed the possible outcome. Although I've already used the deceit bullet, I can summon it from the historical void. After all, before the effects end, I'll definitely reform my body and successfully resurrect. The laws of nature are truly pitiful. Not only will they be deceived, even the item used to deceive it is fake. The only problem is that the bullet might not be able to deceive the mysticism law. It was already a little difficult to deal with Kona's Kilgore back then. Amidst his thoughts, he slowly surveyed the area and gradually gained inspiration. That was to use Sapphira Castle. After gaining initial control of Sapphira Castle, he could already mobilize the power of a Sequence 2 angel here. And many of the things he had come into contact with previously had explained that the authority of Sapphira Castle had a high probability of spanning over the 3 pathways of Seer, Apprentice, and Marauder. It could generate a convergence effect on the corresponding Beyonders, and it had clearly attracted the attention of Amon. That was to say, Klein suspected that Sapphira Castle had the power of these 3 pathways at the same time. However, as a seer, most of the power he could stir was concentrated in this domain. With the help of the medium known as the Deceit Bullet, I might be able to stir the other powers of Sapphira Castle. Since I'm already capable of using some miracles in the seer domain, having power from the Marauder pathway at the angel level is a highly reasonable deduction. The only problem is that there must be a medium of a sufficient level. This way, I don't have to worry about not being able to deceive that rule. As his thoughts brightened up, he seriously began to formulate a plan. He used the mysticism laws as his target and attempted to formulate a scam. In order to reduce the difficulty, it's best to have additional preparations. I can't deceive something out of nothing, at least unless I'm Amon's true body. Yes. I'll bestow a tube of my blood to Little Sunday. I'll create a fake respawn point that exceeds the range. And then, using the Deceit Bullet as a trigger, stir the corresponding angel-level powers contained within Sapphira Castle, misdirecting that rule and making it view the fake respawn point as the real one, while the real one becomes the fake one. He outlined the details bit by bit, and when his thoughts finally took form, Klein immediately used the mysticism connection between himself and the spot he died, to observe the actual situation with his true vision. He saw that the grayish-yellow fog had thinned a lot, and the deep ravine that hid Chernobyl was no different from before. It was unknown where Amon, who was wearing a pointed hat and a monocle, had stolen a rock from and had placed it on the spot where Klein had passed away. He sat on it and patiently played with a human-skinned glove. He occasionally bent the human-skinned glove's finger and stretched it at other times, as if he could pass 100 years doing that. About a kilometer away, in a certain spot in the grayish-yellow fog, 3 Amons in black classical mage robes crouched around a rock as they seriously played poker cards that they had stolen from somewhere. From time to time, they would nudge their monocle. Elsewhere in this extensive moor, Amon would be either alone or in groups, strolling leisurely, writing in thought, or discussing all sorts of questions with one another. In the dark and dangerous forsaken land of the gods, it was such a harmonious scene. It would have been better if the young men weren't all the same, wearing classic black robes, pointed hats and monocles, with similar black hair, black eyes, broad foreheads, and thin faces. Just as Klein was about to make a further observation, the Amon sitting on the rock suddenly raised his head. He nudged his crystal-carved monocle and looked at him. Across the moor, all of the Amons looked up at the highest point of the fog of history. Klein immediately retracted his gaze and cut off the connection. In the City of Silver, Derek Berg arrived at the top of the spire and met Chief Colin Iliad. "Your Excellency, I've already received the promise of blessings," Derek said frankly and directly. With white hair and an old scar on his face, Colin Iliad was visibly relieved. He slowly nodded and said, "That's good. That's good." He had repeated the sentence in a rare instance. As an excellent demon hunter and the City of Silver's chief, he had always been patient, never taking unnecessary risks. Therefore, with the sudden lack of a response from the fool, he didn't immediately turn to the true creator, and he decided to wait patiently for another month. For the City of Silver, which had been waiting in the Dark Ages for more than 2,000 years, a month was something that could be accepted. Without waiting for Derek to reply, Demon Hunter Colin left the window and calmly said, "Head back first. I'm going to start preparing for the advancement ritual." Derek glanced at the chief and said sincerely, "You'll definitely succeed." He didn't stay any longer. He immediately left the spire and returned home. After setting up the ritual again and placing the 6 powerful corpses that he had hunted to the correct position, Colin Iliad began to concoct the potion. After all of this was done, the City of Silver chief closed his eyes and lowered his head, chanting in Jotun, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the grey fog, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck." Above the grey fog, Klein saw ripples of light emanate as he heard a slightly illusory prayer. He immediately summoned a paper figurine and combined the power of Sapphira Castle with it. He threw it into the prayer circle and conveniently marked the City of Silver's chief. At the same time, with the help of this prayer circle, he observed the situation of the entire spire and the City of Silver. He confirmed that there was no sign of Amon's parasitic existence near the chief or Little Sunday. "I have to seize this opportunity." Klein immediately conjured the World Gehrman Sparrow and made him pose as he prayed. At this moment, Colin Iliad saw the light. In the holy light, a holy angel with 12 pairs of illusory wings suddenly descended. As clean, white feathers fluttered down, the demon hunter was embraced by these wings of light. This was a blessing from Mr. Fool. 1176 PLO. In the face of the angel's embrace, Colin Iliad wasn't astonished. He accepted everything with a calm expression, as though he was already prepared. The ritual began. He took a step forward, picked up the silver night potion, and poured it into his mouth. Without a sound, this demon hunter's body swelled up, turning into a grayish-blue giant with bluish-black veins covering him. He stood several meters tall, with black cracks on his forehead. Every inch of this giant contained the indescribable power of mystery and terror. Apart from his head, which still retained the appearance of a human, the rest of his body was akin to a mythical creature that exerted a strange mental influence. In the next second, the skull underlying Colin Iliad's head seemed to soften as it sank inwards. With the black crack as its core, his head slowly squirmed, as though it was forming a nebulous vortex. Such pain made the City of Silver's chief, who had killed many powerful creatures, unable to restrain himself. He let out a series of howling cries that could make the minds of ordinary creatures split apart. If it wasn't for the fact that Colin Iliad had already evacuated the members of the Spire in advance, leaving behind only the demigod-level Waite Chermont to watch over him and prevent any accidents from happening, many Beyonders would have definitely lost control. The remains of the 6 powerful living creatures that were situated in different spots floated up under the invisible power of the ritual, circling the mutated Colin Iliad, using some sort of mysterious connection to awaken some of the memories of this peerless demon hunter. It was the experience of hunting demons. It was him painfully ending the former chief's attack with his own hands. It was his life of defeating powerful monsters again and again. These manifestations appeared like painting on an altar. Sometimes they would be integrated into Colin Iliad, and sometimes they would be extracted from him, helping him define himself. He maintained a certain level of clarity during the extreme pain and changes. Only at this moment did Colin Iliad finally understand the essence of the ritual. As a Sequence 4 demon hunter, the hunting of every powerful creature was a battle of intense mental catharsis. It left a deep impression in his life. With these powerful mental imprints, he was able to locate himself after consuming the potion, and not be lost in pain and madness. This made Colin Iliad recall a term recorded in some of the books in the City of Silver, anchor. At Sequence 3, he was considered a deity in a certain sense. He could respond to prayers within a certain range, so an anchor was required. As this wasn't the level of an angel, an anchor didn't necessarily need to be a believer. It could be replaced by other things, such as the clear marks in one's life that had meaning in mysticism. In the memories that had been awakened, Colin Iliad slowly regained his self-awareness. He felt his body again and grasped its changes. Right on the heels of that, a layer of wings formed from illusory light extended out from behind him. They fused with the surrounding paintings as they constantly shrank inwards. The surface of Colin Iliad's body collapsed into a silver armor that was firm and beautiful, but it didn't possess any weight to it. After the demon hunter advanced to a silver knight, due to the difference in the deity's blessing, there would be minute differences between silver knights. Previously, the leader of the King Court's chasers, Light-Color Merskogen, had received blessings from the Giant King. Therefore, the various aspects of the Silver Knight domain were much stronger. On the other hand, Colin Iliad could occasionally make his body condense a silver rapier that could teleport. While in combat, it would appear at random during an attack, with beneficial tendencies, bringing about unpredictable changes. In addition, he could also obtain a certain uniqueness when using mercury liquefaction. As the silver armor finally took form, Colin Iliad had completed his advancement. Apart from not having a single vertical eye on his head, he was equivalent to a mythical creature. At this moment, he raised his right hand and waved it to the side. At a small hill outside the City of Silver, a silver beam erupted out of thin air. It tore apart everything around it, splitting the small hill into 2 halves. During Colin Iliad's advancement to Silver Knight, Derek Bird completed the bestowment ritual and obtained a small metal tube. Seizing the opportunity of the City of Silver's chief creating abnormalities and drawing away most of the attention, Klein suddenly reached out while in the ancient palace above the grey fog. He had summoned a bullet and death knell from the historical void. Right on the heels of that, he did a divination in advance, confirming that there weren't any signs of Amon's parasites around Little Sunday. Without any hesitation, he opened the revolver's cylinder and stuffed the deceit bullet into it. Pa! With a shake of his right hand, he closed the cylinder and used the mysticism connection to aim at the spot where he had died. Bang! He calmly pulled the trigger and fired the only bullet. At the same time, taking advantage of this Beyonder effect, he willed Sapphira Castle's powers into mobilizing. The gray fog boiled once again, including the space around them. A majestic but slightly dark energy surged out like a tidal wave, wrapping around the bullet, passing through the gap and shooting towards the real world. The light in Sapphira Castle suddenly dimmed. Suppressing his fear and horror, Klein used Death Knell's historical projection to simulate the feeling of a sudden descent. He leaped towards the crimson star representing the sun and leaped towards the tiny tube of his blood. On the barren moors of Chernobyl, all of the Amans wearing pointed hats raised their heads and looked at the lightning that streaked across the sky. They looked at a deep and quiet swath that even the lightning couldn't illuminate. The Amans nudged their monocles, and after a moment of silence, they laughed. He doesn't seem like someone who can come up with such a solution. Palez? He joined this organization codenamed the Tarot Club? In the Berg household in the City of Silver. The darkness in front of Derek suddenly turned dark, as if the candles in the room had been burned to ashes. To the residents of the City of Silver, this wasn't a good thing. Derek's eyes immediately lit up with the light of the sun. At that moment, bits of light burst out from the deep darkness like transparent squirming worms. The metal tube that Derek had received shattered automatically as fresh red blood floated out from it and suspended itself in midair. It didn't spread apart but instead merged with the fragments of light. In just 2 or 3 seconds, these light fragments condensed into one, forming a huge ball of light. The spherical light ball stretched out and changed, quickly forming a figure. The figure had a deep outline and a cold expression. He wore a silk half-top hat and a black coat while holding a black iron-black revolver. It was none other than Gehrman Sparrow. Having successfully deceived the laws of mysticism, Klein used the help of his old blood to complete his resurrection. Without needing any introduction, Derek had already recognized the visitor through his special temperament. After being stunned for a moment, he instinctively revealed an uncontrollable smile. "Mr. World?" Klein raised his head slightly and looked at Little Sun, who seemed to have grown taller. He subconsciously reached out and pressed down on his top hat. He then nodded gently and said, "I will be in the forsaken land of the gods during this period of time. However, I have to leave now. I can't lure Amon into the City of Silver. If there's a chance in the future, I will cooperate with you." Having understood what Mr. World meant, Derek nodded heavily and said, "All right." Just as Klein raised his right hand and was about to snap his fingers to leave with flaming jump, Derek looked at him and suddenly pointed to the storage cabinet in the room. "Mr. World, do you need to bring some food with you? There are mushrooms that can produce milk." Klein controlled himself, not letting the corners of his mouth twitch. He maintained his cold attitude and said, "I don't drink milk." As soon as he finished speaking, he snapped his fingers, causing a scarlet flame to fly out of his pocket, wrapping around him like water. The fire quickly dissipated like falling stars, and Klein's figure disappeared from Derek Berg's room. Outside the City of Silver, in a deformed forest, flames flashed continuously, extending all the way to the moors leading to the north. After he truly left the City of Silver did Klein slow down his footsteps and summon a lantern from the historical void. He had long expected that the revival process would go so smoothly. After all, once he found the correct solution, there was no way that Amon could stop him. In the City of Silver, Amon only had a few avatars at the sequence 4 or 3 level, so Klein could use his true vision to locate them and eliminate them ahead of time. And if they could form an avatar at the sequence 2 level, Klein, who had gained initial control of Sapphira Castle, could stir powers at the power of an angel, allowing him to easily fight such an avatar while being above the gray fog, and would stay undefeatable since he couldn't be attacked. He had the confidence to defeat his opponent. If Amon moved his true body to the City of Silver, then Klein could choose to revive at his original spot. Of course, Amon could create an avatar that was almost at sequence 1 and send him to the City of Silver. However, under the premise of the conservation of Beyonder characteristics, how many avatars could he create? Not more than 2. As for Klein, he could split his remaining blood into multiple portions. He could use the bestowment ritual to send them to Mr. Hanged Man, to Mam Hermit, and to the Star Leonard. There were too many spots where he could revive, so there was no way that Amon could guard all of them. This was an above-board plan based on his own level, Beyonder powers, and the special ability of Sapphira Castle. Before he attempted to revive himself, Klein was already quite certain of the outcome. The only thing he was worried about was that deceit would be detected by Amon ahead of time, allowing him to interfere in a timely manner, causing his respawn location to change. Fortunately, his divination had confirmed that the level of danger wasn't high. This was one of the reasons why he dared to try. Phew, I've really escaped from Amon. As he advanced amidst the dim yellow light, Klein felt the presence of his body, and he heaved a sigh of relief. Of course, he knew very well that he was going to encounter the relentless pursuit of Amon's main body and various avatars. Chapter 1177 Substitute. On the desolate moors filled with deep ravines, Amon stood in different spots. They opened their mouths and chanted in Jotun, the blessed of the spirit world and Sapphira Castle, the mystery stemming from ancient times, the witness of an extended history, protector of Backland magic and drama performers, the great Gehrman Sparrow. These voices were layered as they bored into the void, as though they extended to an infinite distance. 10 seconds later, all of them adjusted their crystal monocles in different manners and chuckled softly. He changed it really quickly. If Gehrman Sparrow was still automatically responding to this honorific name, they could then use this opportunity to determine the other party's location and create an error to appear directly beside their target. In the darkness that was illuminated by lightning from time to time, the hatted and coated Klein proceeded north at a moderate pace while holding a lantern. There's a prayer. Amon is using Gehrman Sparrow's honorific name. This means that a number of Amons aren't too far from me. But the City of Silver doesn't have his parasites. They're in the surrounding patrol teams, or in some unexpected creatures. As he walked, Klein suddenly turned his head and listened carefully for a few seconds. Regarding this matter, he was rather glad that he was cautious enough. He had changed the honorific name that allowed default acknowledgement while above the gray fog. It went from the protector of Backland magic and drama performers to protector of all poor children in Backland. This came from the lone charity bursary foundation he had set up. Yes. Amon is a cryptologist. It's very likely that he can interpret this honorific name from all the information regarding Dwayne Dantes. No, I don't even need an automatic response. As Klein looked at the faint yellow light emitted by the lantern, he quickly made a decision. He made every worm of spirit only capable of listening to prayers, without having the ability to autonomously respond unless they had been given permission from the main body. This way, frequent prayers would severely affect his daily life, but it wasn't a big problem. This was because, other than Amon's vile harassment, no one else would pray to Gehrman Sparrow since he hadn't spread the word about his honorific name. After settling this matter, Klein thought of all of Amon's terrifying aspects. He suddenly had some doubts about what to do next. His original plan was to stay far away from the City of Silver and head to the Noise Ruins in the north to investigate the situation there. He wanted to see if he could obtain the main ingredients needed for the Miracle Invoker potion. However, after connecting that ancient city ruins with Amon, a problem was revealed. Klein could already confirm that the upper levels of neighboring pathways also followed the law of Beyonder characteristic convergence. Since Amon had been wandering around the forsaken land of the gods for more than 1,000 years and had come near the City of Silver, how could he not be attracted to the Noise Ruins in the north? For the chief of the City of Silver to not dare to enter, it means the power in Noise City has definitely reached the level of an angel. Amon wouldn't ignore it. He probably doesn't dare to directly eat such a high-level Beyonder characteristic of a neighboring pathway, but that doesn't prevent him from setting up a trap. Even if he hadn't done so in the past, he would definitely be rushing over there now. Of course, I can't exclude the possibility that Amon has yet to discover it because, during the City of Silver Chief's first visit, the noise ruins weren't as dangerous. Perhaps that power at the angel level came to the noise ruins later. He has been constantly migrating his believers to avoid Amon. Amidst his thoughts, Klein felt a little afraid about heading northwest for the ancient city. He decided to first see if there were any other ways to obtain the main ingredient of the miracle invoker potion before considering if he should head to the periphery of the noise ruins to observe and gather some intel. With this in mind, he walked towards the wreckage of a tall tower in his black coat and half-top hat, guided by the occasional lightning. Along the way, in the dangerous darkness outside the dim yellow light, monsters lined up and silently followed him. They were already his marionettes. Compared to them, the saints of the seer pathway were even more bizarre and terrifying. As they walked, one of the monsters that looked like a fish with limbs suddenly chanted in Jotun, "The sun that is eternal, you are an inextinguishable light, you are the embodiment of order." The moment it finished reciting the three-lined honorific name, the monster collapsed to the ground and lost its life. The honorific name of deities often wasn't limited to 3 lines, but when chanting, one could choose any 3. For example, the Eternal Blazing Sun's complete honorific name was Eternal Blazing Sun, Inextinguishable Light, Embodiment of Order, God of Contracts, Guardian of Businesses. And just now, Klein had used the first 3. With this method, he prayed to the Lord of Storms, the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, and the Evernight Goddess, hoping to receive a certain response. However, there was no change in his surroundings 15 minutes later. It's useless to pray to a sequence 0 true deity in the forsaken land of the gods. Unless the target is the true creator, or is an existence that wields things like Sapphira Castle or the Chaos Sea. That's not right. In Afternoon Town, that clergyman had the goddess's true name concealed when saying it. When he mentioned the 4th king of angels, he suffered immolation due to the involvement of deities. Perhaps it's because there's still all kinds of divine power in the forsaken land of the gods, not only concealment and degeneration. And the true names of the different deities each have special meaning in mysticism, allowing it to stir the corresponding powers. This way, it would explain why the City of Silver has been teaching the 2 true names of Badheil and Harabergen, but they didn't end up establishing any connection with the God of Combat or the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. The prayers in the forsaken land of the gods are not heard by the true deities, or even if they can hear them, they are unable to respond. This also means that there are no remnant powers of the God of Combat or the God of Knowledge, otherwise, there would have been certain anomalies. Yes, it's also possible that it's not because there are no anomalies, but that the 2 grade 0 sealed artifacts, God-level sealed artifacts, in the City of Silver have eliminated them. In that case, if I were to directly chant the true name of the goddess, would I cause the surrounding darkness and concealment to stir? If this kind of power can be controlled, I'll have an additional effective trump card when being tracked by Amon. The probability isn't very high. Directly chanting the true name of a deity is an act of blasphemy, and it will result in the corresponding backlash, just like Afternoon Town's clergyman. Based on his logic and the phenomenon he had seen, Klein came up with a theory on the present situation. He was eager to try reading out all the true names of the deities he knew, one by one, and checking their effects. Finally, he restrained himself and didn't blindly make the attempts. I'd better go above the gray fog to do a divination first. Otherwise, who knows if there will be an unbearable accident. Divination involving deities might not give a clear revelation. After muttering inwardly for a while, Klein scoffed at his impulsiveness. My previous plan was akin to, I haven't been courting death for 2 days. I shall do it seriously today. At that moment, he had already arrived at a collapsed tower. He sat beside a wall that had only been cut down by half. He reached out to take out a paper crane from the historical void, and he ignited it. He wanted to see if he could contact the Snake of Fate will accept in series if there was a medium. He wanted to know where he could obtain the main ingredients of the miracle invoker potion. Under the illumination of his third summoning of the lantern, Klein fell into a deep sleep, but he didn't dream of anything. Indeed, it doesn't work. After he woke up, Klein shook his head and let his body enter a historical void. Following that, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and arrived above the gray fog. Sitting at the seat belonging to the fool, he beckoned for a small paper box from the junk pile. Inside was a stack of paper cranes. These were personally folded by a certain baby. At the same time, the world German sparrow was conjured. He prayed to Mr. Fool in a grayish-white region and requested him to forward his request to Miss Justice, saying that this act could allow her to make contributions to her exchange for the manipulator potion formula. Of course, Klein had already revealed that the potion needed to be consumed while amidst a huge emotional resonance. Backlund, Empress Borough, inside the Hall family's luxurious mansion. Audrey returned to her bedroom once again and set up a bestowment ritual to obtain the paper crane. She picked up a thin pencil and wrote on the paper crane's surface, "Dwayne Dantes has requested you to meet with me." After finishing her preparations, Audrey followed Mr. World's instructions and placed the paper crane under her pillow before lying down to sleep. Soon, she saw a pitch-black desolate plain. As a dreamwalker who had given herself hints in advance, she maintained her consciousness and walked towards the black steeple in the middle of the plains with strong curiosity. As soon as she arrived at her destination, Audrey's spiritual perception was triggered. She raised her head and looked at the top of the steeple. At some point in time, there was a giant silver snake coiled there. This gigantic snake didn't have any scales. Its body was covered with symbols and patterns that formed wheels that were connected to each other, with different labels. At that moment, the gigantic snake was staring at Audrey with its bright red and cold eyes. It said in a low voice, "What does Dwayne Dantes want?" "This is the angel of the fate pathway that gave Ma'am Hermit a drop of blood?" Audrey controlled her thoughts and calmly looked at the gigantic snake. She said in honesty, "He wanted me to ask you where he can obtain the main ingredient of the miracle invoker potion?" The gigantic silver snake suddenly fell silent for a few seconds before saying, "The number of sequence 2s in different pathways differ in numbers. Under the situation of the quota of attendant of mysteries being filled, there can only be a total of 6 miracle invokers. A miracle invoker is the name of a sequence 2 potion. Mr. World is going to become an angel? Or is he making preparations for his partner? No, if it's a companion, he can get them to ask him themselves." Audrey was first alarmed before she began to look forward to the mysterious serpent's answer. Chapter 1178 I have a blessed. The gigantic silver snake looked down at Audrey and opened its blood-red mouth. The sequence 1 potion that Zeradol, the leader of the secret order, consumed came from an attendant of mysteries. In other words, he possesses an extra miracle invoker characteristic. Similarly, it was the same for the ancestor of the Antigonus family back then. Of course, if they were interested in something, or if they had a candidate who had won the favor of the family to the point of them being willing to nurture them, then an angel with sufficiently high status can separate the extra miracle invoker beyonder characteristic to the other party. The third miracle invoker's beyonder characteristic had combined with a characteristic of mysterious origins. It has become sealed artifact 0-05, also known as the magic wishing lamp. A true deity once attempted to destroy this item, to separate the characteristics and allow them to converge automatically, but eventually failed. The fourth and fifth miracle invoker beyonder characteristics are in the form of a grade 0 sealed artifact that exists in the churches of the eternal blazing sun and Lord of Storms. One of them is named 0-13. It comes from the third epoch's creator, designated as the Last Banquet. The other is codenamed 0-32, a product of the War of the Four Emperors, designated as Theater with Curtains That Never Draw. The sixth miracle invoker beyonder characteristic might be in the Forsaken Land of the Gods. During the third epoch, there was a remnant dark demonic wolf who occasionally appeared. After the cataclysm, he vanished without a trace. Audrey listened attentively and thought carefully for a moment before saying, "You're saying that, under the situation where the attendant of mystery spots are filled, there are only 6 miracle invokers. And now, you only mentioned the secret order's leader, Zeradal, and the ancestor of the Antigonus family, but the spots don't seem to be filled. In such a situation, there might be an extra miracle invoker beyond her characteristic." This wasn't information that the World Gehrman Sparrow had informed her of in advance. Instead, it was a question that Audrey had come up with on her own accord from the details of the answer and her knowledge of mysticism. The eyes of the giant silver snake moved slightly. Indeed. There should be 3 attendants of mysteries. Visit website Our List Novel. But in the second epoch, in the era when the ancient god, Phlegria, still lived, the third set of the attendant of mysteries beyond her characteristic seemed to have disappeared without a trace. No one knows where it is. Likewise for the corresponding miracle invoker beyond her characteristic. Perhaps it has already combined together and has found a sufficiently concealed method to hide itself. Audrey nodded gently and said, "I understand. I'll pass on the information to Mr. Dwayne Dantes. Oh. He even asked me to ask you if there's anything you need his help with." The giant silver snake slithered up and a third of its body stood up. "No, a small matter. Yes, I have a blessed who is an outstanding gourmet. He has a desire to taste ice cream from the various noble families, so as to determine the most delicious one. This request. Mr. Snake, maybe it's Ma'am Snake, is really nice to her blessed. His tone is as if he can't wait. This is too simple. I can agree to help on Mr. World's behalf and complete it on my own. I'll just treat it as accumulating the sufficient contributions needed to exchange the potion formula." Audrey said thoughtfully, "No problem. But how do I send him the ice cream?" The giant silver snake slowly coiled and said, "Sacrifice it to him. He's already a sequence 3 saint and can accept sacrifices in the same city. His honorific name is the embodiment of luck, the clairvoyant monster, the calamity that spreads misfortune, the witnesses of all fates in Backlund, the keeper of chaos and madness. There's a difference between this honorific name and a normal sequence 3's. There's no name at the end." Audrey's eyes darted around slightly, but she didn't say anything further and nodded in agreement. Keeper of chaos and madness. Will's last honorific name is quite interesting. This shouldn't be the honorific name of the Snake of Fate, but something that he used when he was at sequence 3. Some tweaks were made later on. The monster pathways watches over chaos and madness? Or could it be said that in this world, even for fate, those at the lower sequences are in chaos and madness? Monsters are working hard to resist all of this, making everything seem normal? After Klein heard Miss Justice's answer, he didn't find it odd for Wuxia to request for ice cream. Instead, he found the honorific name of the Life School of Thought president rather interesting. Having a blessed. That's like saying, I know someone. Did Will learn this from me? No, I have a real blessed, Danitz. Later on, I'll have this fellow sacrifice something for me to eat. I can't really eat those mutated monsters or summon projections from the historical void, right? Yes, if I have a chance, I'll invite little son to try them together. I can't let him be obsessed with Frank's mushrooms. The number of blessed serving will definitely won't be less than mine. There might even be more. He has the huge life school of thought. Klein conjured the World Gehrman Sparrow and made him reply to Miss Justice, indicating that the ice cream contributed plenty. After completing all of this, he rapped the edge of the long mottled table and seriously considered the problem with the main ingredient of the miracle invoker. There's no need to think about the miracle invoker beyond her characteristic with Zeradal. It's impossible for him to separate it to give it to me. He only wants to turn me into his marionette. It's not like there's zero hope with Antigonus's 2 portions, but if that's the case, I'll have to request it from the goddess again. I can't offer something equivalent. I'm afraid. Besides, the goddess might not be able to provide it. The reason why she wants to seal the half-fool, who has lost control, is probably because she is unable to kill him. Once he is killed, he will be able to escape his current predicament and revive elsewhere, just like how I escaped from Ammon. Under such a situation, the goddess has no way of getting Antigonus to separate a miracle invoker beyond her characteristic. Even a true deity can't shatter 0-05, so there's no point targeting it. It's useless even if I have it. This sealed artifact's origins are truly mysterious. There's something very fishy about it. The Church of the Eternal Blazing Suns 0-13 is called the Last Banquet. It comes from the City of Silver's creator. Why does this person always like to use the names that have dangerous implications? The Church of the Lord of Storms 0-32 is theater with curtains that never draw. Just the sound of it allows me to imagine what it's like. The chances of obtaining these 2 grade 0 sealed artifacts are very low, but it's not impossible. It just depends on whether the Eternal Blazing Sun and Lord of Storms are willing to support my growth so as to contain Ammon. Yes. Up to now, they have yet to show any kindness. I can't find a suitable way to interact with the right person. I can't possibly use divination to spy on the Eternal Blazing Sun again and communicate with him through space, right? If that happens, wouldn't it be better if he directly invades Sapphira Castle and takes control of this place? If I were to nurture Mr. Hanged Man and wait till he has the qualifications to come into contact with a grade 0 sealed artifact, I'll most likely have become Ammon. The true creator knows a clue to the 3rd characteristic of the Attendant of Mysteries. His divine kingdom and holy residence are in the forsaken land of the gods. These 2 might be related somehow. The 2 sets of miracle invoker characteristics and an Attendant of Mysteries characteristics are highly likely to be in the forsaken land of the gods. I wonder which one is in the Noise Ruins. Yes, the true creator should only know a clue, and not its exact location. Otherwise, he would have obtained that Attendant of Mysteries beyond her characteristic before the War of the 4 Emperors and effectively increased his subordinate strength. In other words, the Attendant of Mysteries beyond her characteristic is something even a true deity can't obtain quickly, and it's necessary to search for it. It might not be so easy for Ammon to come across it, allowing him to set up a trap. If the danger within the ruins were only recently found, having just been transplanted, it would match this trait. From the looks of it, I still have to make a trip. However, I have to be careful enough. The danger comes from Ammon and also from the ruins. I'll do a divination first, then I'll observe and gather intelligence from a distance. I won't enter blindly and will be patient enough. Klein conjured a pen and paper and was about to write the corresponding divination statement when he suddenly thought of something and decided to make another confirmation. He drew a complicated symbol that was a mixture of concealment and mystery prying. He threw it into the crimson star representing the magician. With Gehrman Sparrow's image and tone, he asked her to question a Rhodes. Backlund, East Borough. Furs, who was about to move houses, drew the curtains and lit a candle. She set up a mirror and found Zio to act as a bystander. She then drew the symbol that Mr. World had given her. In the room, the environment gradually turned dark as cold winds stirred, causing the 2 to tremble. The surface of the mirror suddenly rippled, forming ancient dark red Faceac text, "You have summoned the great Rhodes. You have to abide by the corresponding rules. You have to answer a question for every question asked. If you lie or refuse to answer, you will be punished." "All right," Furs, who had been warned, calmly replied. Following that, she asked curiously, "Where can one obtain the main ingredient of the miracle invoker potion?" On the surface of the mirror, dark red words appeared one after another as other lines vanished. They answered the question in detail. It's basically the same as Will's answer. Above the gray fog, through the crimson star representing Miss Magician, Klein watched the specific process and nodded in disappointment. After Furs memorized the answer, she said nervously, "It's your turn to ask." The dark red words changed and formed a new sentence. "Have you had an erotic dream in the past year?" "Phew. Thankfully, it's still okay." Furs heaved a sigh of relief and said, "Yes." This was human nature. She didn't feel that there was anything to be ashamed of. Following that, she raised the second question. "Do you have any suggestions on the matter regarding obtaining the main ingredient of the miracle invoker?" Rhodes dispersed the dark red text and used silver colors to form new words. The Abraham family still holds the Apprentice Pathways Sequence 2 Planeswalker Potion formula, as well as the corresponding powerful sealed artifacts. A total of 2 of them. The Aurora Order also has one. This. Klein's eyes lit up as he thought of a new possibility. "Is that so?" Furs frowned slightly and said, "It's your turn to ask a question." The silver color on the surface of the mirror faded away as dark red colors formed a sentence. "Other than you, who else was the star of your erotic dream?" Furs gaped as her face flushed red. Chapter 1179 Preparations both ways. At that moment, Furs felt her cheeks burning as she stiffened. She didn't even dare to turn her head to look at her friend. She realized that she had severely underestimated the bottom line of the magic mirror. After stuttering for a moment, Furs recalled Mr. World's reminder and closed her eyes. "I choose to accept the punishment." A silvery white bolt of lightning fell from the air in the room, but the moment it appeared, the lightning vanished without a trace like it was a hallucination. The dark red words on the surface of the mirror were dyed silver as they were quickly replaced with new content. "The question and answer game will end here today. Goodbye." Without waiting for Furs to open her eyes and before Zio could react, the rippling light in the mirror instantly calmed down. The gloom and darkness in the room shattered as they were swallowed by the light of the candle. Wasn't there supposed to be a punishment? Furs waited for a few seconds before opening her eyes slightly. She looked at the mirror that had returned to normal and then at Zio, who was watching by the sidelines. Zio pointed at the top of her head and said, "There was lightning that smote at you, but it disappeared halfway. Also, the magic mirror had already left." "The magic mirror was only joking?" "That's not right. The warning I received was that the questions would be rather embarrassing, and the punishments would be rather heavy. Could it be that Mr. Fool protected me?" Furs rubbed her right cheek as she made a guess. "Perhaps." Zio nodded in agreement with her friend. Just as Furs heaved a sigh of relief and rejoiced, she suddenly realized that Zio was looking at her earnestly. What's the matter?" Furs's heart skipped a beat. Zio asked thoughtfully, "In that erotic dream of yours, who was the main lead?" Who would remember such a dream from so long ago? Besides, aren't dreams blurry and unclear?" Furs forced a smile. Zio tersely acknowledged. "If that's the case, why didn't you answer with that just now?" "I was nervous." "I was too nervous." Furs glanced at the luggage that she had finished packing and said, "It's time for us to move. I miss having a fireplace." As she spoke, she walked towards her luggage. It was only at this moment that she realized that, at times, the outcome was similar whether she answered the magic mirror's question or not. Is this the social death that was mentioned by Gehrman Sparrow? I really want to bury my head into the ground. Furs continuously took deep breaths in an attempt to calm her burning face and embarrassed heart. In the ancient palace above the fog, Klein threw the sea god scepter back into the junk pile and scoffed at Rhodes's act. Despite knowing that I was the one who sent someone to summon it, it actually dared to raise such a question. Only when I stopped the punishment did it hurriedly change its attitude and leave in a panic. It sure had fun. However, its answer has given me a new train of thought. I really don't need to restrict myself to the path of a miracle invoker. The second blasphemy slate is most likely from the City of Silver's creator, and is now in the hands of Adam. Although Amon and his brother are mutually staying away from each other's affairs and aren't on especially good terms, they have worked together before. I don't believe that he has never seen that blasphemy slate. If that's the case, he is definitely aware of the miracle invoker's ritual and can guess that I'll be bringing the City of Silver out of the forsaken land of the gods. When that happens, he wouldn't even need to put much effort into tracking me. He just needs to wait at the giant king's court. Yes, I can't go according to the enemy's expectations, especially since this is a god of deceit and the god of mischief. Countless accidents will happen. If it's because of my participation that the City of Silver's thousands of years of hope ends up being destroyed, then it'll be completely contradictory to my original intentions. The problem with a planeswalker is that I might hear Mr. Door's ravings, and will suffer the scrutiny and corruption from the cosmos that's worse than sequence 2 angels from other pathways. Of course, this isn't completely unacceptable. Also, will I need to pay back the 2 resurrection chances that Sapphira Castle gave me? That's still fine since I'll definitely transfer back to being an attendant of mysteries at sequence 1 because Mr. Door has already blocked off the advancement path of the apprentice pathway. He is at least in control of the uniqueness and 2 sets of sequence 1 beyonder characteristics, perhaps even all 3. It's not necessary for me to switch to Planeswalker, but I have to make the necessary preparations. When my options increase, even if Amon tries to stop me, the difficulty of burying a trap in advance will increase significantly. Only then can I become an angel while under the pressure of a king of angels. Yes. I'll stay on the fence for now. I'll prepare for the Miracle Invoker advancement while preparing for the Planeswalker advancement. I'll determine which pathway to take based on the actual situation when the time comes. Having come to a decision, Klein felt refreshed. His mind was abnormally active, and he quickly came up with a preliminary plan. I'm not in a hurry to ask Miss Magician's teacher about the Planeswalker potion formula and the corresponding Grade 0 sealed artifact. This will scare the Abraham family, making them suspect that Miss Magician worships some evil god and has joined some terrible organization. With their current situation, there's a high chance that they won't reply. They will change their identities, move, and sever all ties. Yes, the head of the Saint of Secrets, Bodhi's, will make a fine gift. Regardless of whether the Abraham family gives the Worm of Cosmos, this matter will have to be placed on the agenda. I hope Miss Justice can digest the Dreamwalker potion as soon as possible. I hope that Ma'am Hermit will be prepared. I also hope that the 2 ladies, Miss Magician and Miss Judgment, will be able to improve before the operation. Right, according to what Miss Magician said, Saint of Secrets Bodhi's is a defector of the Abraham family, and the Aurora Order holds a Grade 0 sealed artifact of the apprentice pathway. That's interesting. Perhaps I don't need to contact the Abraham family. I might be able to get what I want from the Saint of Secrets. I have to remind Ma'am Hermit that Bodhi's might be carrying a Grade 0 sealed artifact, so confirmation has to be made before the operation. If that Grade 0 sealed artifact isn't in the hands of the Saint of Secrets, then I'll probably have to face the Angel of Fate Ouroboros to get it. No, Grade 0 sealed artifacts are terrifying to begin with. It's one of the sources of danger. Phew, I'll first wait for Miss Magician's teacher to reply and see if the Abraham family is averse to any mention of the Worm of Cosmos. As he thought of this, Klein suddenly felt a hint of self-deprecation. He felt that he and the Aurora Order appeared to be destined enemies. They often had all kinds of interactions. When the operation begins, the Aurora Order will definitely shout in their hearts, "Why is it you again? Why is it us again?" After letting out a breath, he gathered his thoughts and conjured the World Gehrman Sparrow. He replied to Miss Magician who had reported the answer. Following that, the world prayed once again, requesting Mr. Fool to forward his request to Danitz. On a certain island in the fog sea, Danitz, who was waiting for the golden dream, turned his head to look at Anderson and chuckled. "I'm going to summon Gehrman Sparrow's messenger." Anderson pricked up his brows and scoffed. "You're qualified to consume the conspirer potion. You were the one who made it too obvious. Even I could sense that you were afraid of that messenger." Danitz felt even more pleased with himself as he said humbly. Anderson suddenly guffawed. "Why do you not suspect that I'm pretending to be afraid? I'm just trying to find a reasonable excuse to avoid hearing things I shouldn't be hearing." "Dog's hit, do you think I'll believe the lies you came up with in a hurry?" Danitz was almost convinced. Anderson spread his hands and walked to the door. "You've gathered all the materials of the conspirer potion. Remember to remind Gehrman to not forget my iron-blooded night potion formula." Danitz waved his hand impatiently, indicating that he hadn't forgotten. After Anderson walked out of the room and closed the door, Danitz immediately set up a ritual and summoned the messenger holding 4 blonde, red-eyed heads. Seeing the 8 eyes look over at the same time, Danitz's chest immediately retracted. He forced a smile and handed out a gold coin. "Ma'am, Gehrman Sparrow wants me to tell you that he's fine. He's now in the forsaken land of the gods." "Wait, what did I say? The forsaken land of the gods?" As a crew member of Vice Admiral Iceberg, Danitz's knowledge of mysticism was still adequate. After a momentary pause, his pupils clearly dilated. "All right," Rionette Tinker bit down on the gold coin and answered immediately. Then, she entered the void and vanished from the room. After reporting this to Gehrman Sparrow, Danitz received the iron-blooded knight's potion formula and new orders. "Prepare some local delicacies and sacrifice them to see God Calvetua." "Isn't this mission a little odd?" Danitz muttered to himself, but he didn't dare to raise any questions. He quickly tidied up the altar, found a parchment, and wrote down the supplementary ingredients and corresponding ritual in the iron-blooded night potion formula. Following that, he opened the door and handed the parchment to Anderson. "Form a team of at least 30 people. The stronger the team's strength and chemistry, the better the ritual's effects." Anderson unfolded the parchment in front of Danitz and read it. As he read, his brows gradually furrowed. "If the team's chemistry is to build upon the idea of killing me, the captain, the ritual is rather simple." Without waiting for Danitz to mock him, a burning white flame appeared from his fingertip and burned the parchment. Anderson chuckled. "I need to go back to my homeland to find an opportunity. That place is currently being invaded by Phaenopotter, and war is always the best place for building up and training a team." With a pause, he looked at Danitz and said with a smile, "I've prepared some questions for you. They're in my room. Once you become a conspirer, you can try doing it and see if your intelligence has improved." Dog's hit. "Are you trying to trick me into reading all the books in your room?" Danitz was almost moved, but he immediately understood that something was wrong. No matter how high his intelligence was, he wouldn't be able to solve the questions if he hadn't read the textbooks. "Not bad. It only took you 3 seconds this time to grasp the crux of the matter. If it were in the past, you would have really believed me." Anderson praised with a smile as he turned around and left the inn. 1180 different effects in the forsaken land of the gods, at night when the frequency of lightning had dropped to a very low frequency. 2 slices of white bread and a piece of barbecued meat is pretty good after all. The sweet and sour desserts from the fog sea are better than I had expected. After swallowing the last mouthful of food, Klein sighed in amazement from the bottom of his heart. He then threw the remaining packaging into the darkness. After all, there was no concept of environmental protection here, nor was there a rubbish bin. Of course, he had removed his connection with those items ahead of time, just like how he would head over to Sapphira Castle to perform sterilization every time he abandoned a marionette. This was to prevent Amon's avatars from locking onto him with them. Lifeless objects won't be transferred into a concealed state by the darkness here. Klein raised the lantern that Danitz had sacrificed, and he illuminated the abandoned items. It was only after he filled his stomach that he was in the mood to try out the dangerous things he had previously divined. Amidst the flickering dim yellow light, Klein reached his right hand out into the air and dragged out another projection of himself. It was another version of him from the historical void, one who was also holding onto a lantern. Klein entered the grayish-white fog 1 second later, allowing his projection's consciousness to awaken. The projection was surrounded by a group of monsters. Amidst the endless darkness, it opened its mouth, planning to recite the name, Ammonizes. He didn't manage to make a single sound, as though the words he wanted to say had been concealed. Indeed, it's as I expected. Wearing a silk half-top hat and a black trench coat, Klein slowly took a deep breath. Looking at the lantern that emitted faint yellow light, he suddenly chanted in Jotun, Leodoro. Before he could finish his sentence, more than 100 lightning bolts warped as if they were responding to being summoned. They instantly blanketed the area. There was no time for him to dodge. Even if he had switched places with a marionette, he would still be within the attack range. Amidst the brightening of silvery white light, he collapsed to the ground. His body was charred as he convulsed violently, as though he had become a gigantic piece of coal. Then, his figure rapidly dissipated as the illusion vanished. Wearing a real top hat, clothed in an Inta-styled windbreaker and carrying a simple lantern, Klein immediately returned to reality and continued proceeding forward as if nothing had happened. After walking for a while, his figure suddenly turned blurry and clear. Following that, Klein opened his mouth again and read out a name in Jotun. Oh, just as he produced the first syllable, a transparent flame burst out from his body, instantly reducing him to ashes, not giving him a chance to switch places with his marionette. Klein's figure appeared once again. He pressed his hat and walked calmly on the hill filled with strange plants. Harabergen. Badheil. Omabella. There's nothing out of the ordinary. There are no traces of the corresponding divine powers left in the vicinity of the City of Silver. Medici, Ouroboros, Sasrer. These are of no use, neither one of them are deities. I thought that the situation at Afternoon Town and the Giant King's Court was due to special circumstances. Using Sasrer's true name outside can activate the powers of degeneration from the forsaken land of the gods. As a king of angels with the uniqueness, Red Angel is also considered half a true god. Yet, there aren't any traces left of him. How shameful for a person, no, shameful for a king of angels. As Klein walked down the hill, he followed his spiritual intuition and headed northwest where the city ruins of Noise were. He would occasionally take a detour, occasionally using flaming jump, and he didn't follow the route that the City of Silver had used to explore to reach their destination. Backlund, late at night. Feeling that she had digested the potion a little more, Audrey very eagerly used dream traversal to leave her mansion and to enter the various dreams of the surrounding area. Knowing what the current situation was like, she had a strong desire to become a demigod. Just like that, she suddenly saw someone familiar. This was a noble lady who had a good relationship with her. She was 29 years old and had married a viscount 2 years ago. At this moment, the lady's room was filled with rose petals. The bed was white, and there was a heart-shaped ring placed on it. And she could hear knocking sounds from the outside. With flushed cheeks, the lady quickly walked over and opened the window. A man wearing a black iron mask and a dark cloak leaped in. He hugged the lady and whispered, "I'll take you away from your suffering." Then, the two of them started to wrap their bodies around one another as they rolled into bed. As a dreamwalker who was working hard to digest the potion, Audrey had long seen similar scenes. She had experienced the phase of feeling embarrassed, and she sighed at how everyone's dreams were full of imagination. At that moment, she didn't lose her composure at all. She maintained the etiquette of a spectator, as though she was witnessing an overly intense play. After a brief examination, she discovered a problem. The man wearing the black iron mask wasn't the wife's spouse, but more like a particular playboy in the aristocratic circles. Is this a reflection of what's hidden in her heart? Audrey muttered to herself in an academic manner while analyzing the dream. Following that, she traversed into the dream beside her out of curiosity. This dream corresponded to the noble wife's husband, the Viscount. In the dream, this Viscount was busy attending a discussion at the House of Lords. Later, he was chased by an earl with a revolver. The latter claimed that he had tricked his daughter. After escaping to a safe zone, the Viscount found his female secretary to vent his fear. Audrey couldn't help but leave the dream, wanting to see the state the Viscount and his wife were in. In the bedroom under the illumination of the crimson moonlight, the Viscount was hugging his wife on the huge white bed. His wife was hugging him and sleeping in a very intimate manner. Yes, I have to realize that everyone has a dark side to them. It's just a dream that they've had. If conviction for a mere instantaneous thought was carried out, then everyone would descend into hell, and no one will be spared, including myself. I can control my dark side, preventing it from ever being realized in the real world. To most people, that's already considered excellent. Audrey increasingly felt that acting as a dreamwalker was a way to question and hone one's mind and body. She entered the dreamscape again and traversed to another area. Not long after, she arrived at a warm room. There was a dining table placed over a thick carpet. At the seat of honor was a white-haired old lady. To her sides were a middle-aged couple and 3 children who were not of age. They were all enjoying the delicious food, chatting and laughing. It was dark outside the room. The strong winds made the glass groan and thump as they seemed to brew a horrifying sensation before the disaster struck. What is the owner of this dream bothered about? Audrey retreated from the dream and tried to find an answer from the real world to verify her hypothesis. She then saw a small bed and the white-haired old lady. There were photo frames on the bedside table of the old lady. They were either wrapped in black cloth or white flowers, consisting of a middle-aged couple and 3 underage children. Audrey silently turned her head to look out the window, only to see that there were ruins nearby, ones left behind by an explosion. The young noble lady pursed her lips and suddenly returned to the old lady's dreams. She didn't stop the disaster that might happen. She only conjured a chair and sat on it. She looked at the happy and warm family in a solemn manner. Amidst the howling wind and glass, the room was brightly lit. There was the fragrance of food and laughter everywhere. Audrey had already concluded one of the acting principles of Dreamwalker: a traveler of a dream enters, takes in the sights, and records, never interfering. That was a spectator. In St. Samuel Cathedral, having been summoned by Bishop Anthony Stephen, Leonard slowly walked up the spiral staircase under the sunlight that shone in through the stained glass. Suddenly, he said with a suppressed voice, "Old man, that secret gathering is about to begin again. Are you really planning to attempt to enter the treasures left behind by the Jacob family at the end of the month?" "I'm not sure yet, but this is an opportunity. At the very least, Amon's main body is being tied down by the matter regarding Sapphira Castle. He won't suddenly appear." In Leonard's mind, Pallas Zoroast replied with a slightly hoarse voice, "However, I'm more inclined to reveal the news of the treasure trove. I want the people at the gathering to adventure and explore it. We'll stay in the vicinity and observe the situation, taking what I need from their hands." Leonard was taken aback as he whispered, "Old man, isn't that too sinister?" This was using the members of the Hermits of Fate as tools to step into a trap. Naive, childish. You can tell them all the details and let them decide whether they want to go on their own." Pallas scoffed. Leonard didn't mention it again. Instead, he asked, "Old man, when can I become a demigod?" Pallas chuckled. "If you can obtain a spirit at the level of your former colleague's messenger, you'll be able to digest the potion by the beginning of next year. However, it's better to act according to my instructions." Engage in a deeper level of acting. Wait till the second half of next year, you'll have the qualifications to try for Sequence 4. Of course, I'm not sure if the Church of Evernight will give you the potion and hold a ritual for you. That high-ranking deacon named Casimir Crestet had to wait several years before he truly became a demigod when war truly broke out, didn't he? Leonard nodded and asked thoughtfully, "Old man, can you act as a spirit to help me digest the potion? Your level should be higher than Klein's messenger." Palaz Zoroast fell silent for a few seconds before he chortled. "What a great idea. How about I help you digest the potion?" "How?" Leonard knew that old man was mocking him, but he couldn't help but ask. "I'll deeply parasitize you, gaining full control over your body," Palaz snapped back. As he spoke, Leonard came to the door of the Backlund Diocese's archbishop. He immediately shut his mouth and raised his right hand to knock on the door. "Come in." Anthony Stephen glanced at Leonard, who had opened the door. "You can release that vampire behind Cheney's gate." Chapter 1181 Noise Ancient City. Upon hearing the bishop's instructions, Leonard was first taken aback before he inwardly sighed. Mr. Fool's prophecy was really accurate. No, it's not a prophecy. He was already aware of everything. Leonard quickly reined in his thoughts and followed the procedures to get Bishop St. Anthony to give him an official document. Then, he returned underground and brought 2 members into Cheney's gate. After waiting for the keepers to check the documents, he came to Emlyn White's room, which was illuminated with shining silver candles that were covered with engraved patterns. He opened the heavy stone door with a brass key. Ghostly blue light entered the cell, stabbing Emlyn White's eyes to the point of him instinctively closing his eyes. His face was much paler than before, and his body was much thinner. He exuded a feeling that a gust of wind would lift him up at any moment. Thinking of Mr. Fool's answer, Emlyn suddenly felt confident in his current situation. Without opening his eyes, he slowly stood up and chuckled. "I knew you would take the initiative to send me out. Would you be disappointed if I said that it was just a routine investigation?" Leonard lampooned inwardly and replied without any expression, "I'll give you 30 seconds. If you don't leave Cheney's gate within this period, I'll take it as you voluntarily choosing to stay behind." As a slightly more senior Nighthawk and a captain of a Red Gloves team for several months, Leonard had rich experience in dealing with prisoners. Emlyn's expression froze. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but he ultimately maintained his silence. He walked past Leonard and his 2 teammates and walked out of Cheney's gate. Outside, he suddenly shuddered, as if he wanted to purge the chill in his body. "Once you return, getting some sunlight would fix you up." "Oh, the sun is a rare commodity in Backlund's winter, and you vampires don't enjoy sunbathing. Aren't you an apothecary? You can concoct some medicine from the sun domain yourself." Seeing this, Leonard casually reminded him. Emlyn's condition wasn't the best. On the one hand, he hadn't drunk any spirituality-containing human blood for days. He could only rely on the blood of animals as a substitute. On the other hand, it was because he had stayed behind Cheney's gate for too long. The power of Evernight that supported the seal had eaten into him a little, making him require the effects of medicine from the sun domain to remove the residual effects. As a potions professor, Emlyn was aware of his physical and mental condition. He didn't retort or nod. He only emphasized the word sanguine before asking, "Where's Father Yatravsky?" Visit website Our List Novel. He still needs to stay a little while longer. I hope this bloody war will end soon. Don't worry, we'll let him come out twice a week to get some sunlight. As for which days they'll be, it'll depend on the weather in Backlund. Leonard gave a simple response before sending Emlyn White to the ground and onto the streets. Emlyn hesitated for a moment before asking again, "Where's the nearest hospital?" "What do you want to do?" Leonard asked in a professional manner. "Get a blood transfusion." Emlyn raised his chin slightly, trying his best not to change his expression. Blood transfusion, more like drinking blood. Leonard didn't call him out. He pointed in one direction and gave him the address. After watching the sanguine Viscount leave, he returned underground and began to discuss a recent case with his team members. After several days of traveling, Klein finally arrived near the Noise City ruins in the north. This was equally a desolate plain. The dried riverbed left traces of itself on the ground. Looking at the dark, shadowy city that was filled with a thin fog, he was in no hurry to get close. Instead, he found a hidden spot and muttered the honorific name of Mr. Fool. Following that, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and recited the incantation before entering the world above the grey fog. To return to Sapphira Castle with just a thought, he needed the prayers of the Tarot Club members to stack together, forming a strong and firm anchor. That way, it would provide the Fool with the sufficient summoning power. With the help of the prayer light, Klein used his true vision to check the situation of the Noise ruins from afar. He discovered that the thin fog was slowly dissipating, but it couldn't completely dissipate. On the surface of the city, there wasn't a single spirit body thread. The people who were dressed in linen robes or animal hides were lying in different spots on the streets. They weren't as lively and busy as the time the City of Silver's expedition team visited. After the angel or sealed artifact that occupied this city discovered that their whereabouts were exposed, they chose to migrate. As Klein made a guess based on the situation in front of him, he retracted his gaze and looked at the grayish-white fog that held up Sapphira Castle. He was trying to prevent the miracle invoker, or attendant of mysteries, or the corresponding sealed artifact from hiding in the historical void and ambushing the beyonders of the ancient Noise City. He didn't wish to directly encounter a cluster of translucent maggots that twisted into a huge vortex when he leaped into the fog of history, nor did he wish to be pursued by those terrifying tentacles. The ambush that Zeradal had laid for him still left Klein feeling a lingering sense of fear. From time to time, he would have nightmares, hoping to seek Miss Justice for another round of treatment for psychological trauma. This stimulus was worse than seeing his marionette, Anuni, wear a monocle in front of him while his body remained completely immobile. This was because he had implicated the hounds of Fulgrim. After confirming that the historical void was safe, Klein returned to the real world. He stretched out his hand, grabbed, and pulled out his former self. This former self was also wearing a silk half-top hat, a black trench coat, and holding a simple glass lantern. In the next second, he jumped into the grayish-white fog and followed the illuminated spots in the historical void, running all the way to a period before the first epoch, in that city of a long-dead civilization. To him, this was a very ingenious, safe house. This was because, aside from him, no scholar of yore could trace back to this lost piece of history. Of course, to him, coming all the way here had required him to expend a lot of his spirituality. He could only stay there for another 15 minutes at most, and that was only if he didn't make any burdening attempts at summoning historical void projections. After hiding his true body, Klein's projection in the real world moved forward, quickly arriving outside the Noise ruins. He didn't blindly approach or enter. After circling to a small mound opposite the dried riverbed, he raised his right hand and summoned his original marionette, the cold Earl of the Fallen Konas Kilgore with dark blue eyes. Konas's body squirmed and instantly transformed into Gehrman Sparrow. Then, he reached out and took out a lantern from the historical void. The historical projection who summoned a historical projection had disordered the distance under the dim yellow light of the lantern. In a few steps, he arrived outside Noise City, alone. With the lantern in hand, he passed through the rotting buildings and passed through the thin fog before entering the ruins. Compared to using his true vision above the grey fog, actual contact made him discover more details. The humans and monsters lying in different spots had signs of decay, as though they had been abandoned for some time. Some of them sat on chairs under the eaves of the house, others slumped beside stoves. Some held moldy bread while others held hands. There were some leaning against the walls and sitting on the ground, their lips pressed against a bone flute. This allowed Klein to imagine the situation in the city back when they were living. Some of them were slacking off and resting. Some were baking food, and others were shopping along the streets. Others were focused on music as some came and went, laughing non-stop. There were also others fighting monsters in an arena. This was such a lively and bustling scene, but in reality, everyone had already died and were no longer in possession of their souls. They were only repeating predetermined actions. And one day, this strange scene froze with time, and everyone collapsed without any warning. A city formed by marionettes, the most realistic theater. Back then, the foggy town was in a similar situation. Although I'm also a seer, I still have to say that, in terms of horror, terror, and bizarreness, our pathway is definitely ranked amongst the top 3. Could it be that I'll be acting in the same manner in the future? Attendant of mysteries? With the lantern in hand, Klein walked through the streets that were littered with corpses. He followed his spiritual intuition and headed for the ancient Noise City center. The situation here made him believe that the person who had once ruled the Noise ruins definitely had enough intelligence. After the City of Silver's expedition team broke the peace and serenity here, the entity didn't choose to kill or destroy any clues. Instead, this place was abandoned without hesitation before the entity migrated elsewhere. The reason why the City of Silver wasn't silenced probably had to do with an Amon parasite following behind. Yes, it could also be because of the true creator. As he casually let his thoughts wander, Klein quickly arrived at a relatively intact cathedral. Inside the cathedral stood a statue of a demonic wolf with 8 legs. It was covered with short and dark hair. There was a tuft of grayish-white fur at the top of the statue head. Its pitch-black pupils covered at least 3/4 of its eyes. It's not Phlegria. The dark demonic wolf that occasionally appeared in the 3rd epoch, the god of wishes? He has been in the forsaken land of the gods for thousands of years and has finally found that sequence 1 beyonder characteristic? Just as this thought flashed through his mind, Klein suddenly heard footsteps coming, resounding one after another. Standing sideways, he immediately cast his gaze outside the cathedral. He saw a figure slowly walking through the thin fog before its outline quickly formed. He was nearly 2-3 meters tall, with a slight hunch to his back. With grizzled hair, wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, and a scar at the corners of his mouth, he looked like an old priest or bishop while donning a long black clergyman's robe. His dark brown eyes were calm, unlike the monsters deep in the darkness who were bloodthirsty and zero intelligence. However, in the long, quiet night of low-frequency lightning, this clergyman didn't carry any animal hide lanterns or have any fire lit. He just quietly walked through the thin fog. Chapter 1182 The Holy Word. Although it had been less than a week since he entered the forsaken land of the gods, Klein had long gotten a good understanding of the place through Little Sunday. He knew that normal humans, even saints, had to use fire to create light in the darkness. Otherwise, it was very easy for them to encounter dangerous monsters lurking in the depths of the darkness, or be secretly devoured, disappearing without a trace, never to be found again. And at that moment, the elderly clergyman wasn't carrying any animal hide lanterns. Instead, he passed through the fog in the darkness and slowly entered the cathedral that was illuminated by the dim yellow light. If it wasn't for his deep and calm eyes that didn't show any signs of madness, Klein's first reaction would have been that he had encountered a special monster. Of course, having a normal person's state of mind and being immersed in darkness were contradictory traits. Any living creature with any semblance of normal intelligence could easily come up with a conclusion that this person might be even more terrifying than special monsters. Klein had only met one person who could pass through the darkness without being affected by it while having sufficient intelligence, blasphemer Amon. Sensing that the faint yellow light was reflected on his face, the tall black-robed clergyman with a slight hunch to his back stopped in his tracks. Looking at the demonic wolf statue, he hoarsely asked, "Where did the owner of this city go?" Klein was the kind of person who would try his best to resolve a problem peacefully if a fight with a stranger could be avoided. As he raised his guard, he calmly replied, "I don't know where either, I just entered the city, who knows where the owner went?" Just as he said that, the entire cathedral dimmed. A thin fog surged in like a tidal wave from the outside, drowning the interior. The lantern in Klein's hand failed miserably at illuminating the windows and the situation at the door. It was dark outside, and nothing could be seen. In the blink of an eye, the cathedral that worshipped the demonic wolf statue seemed to be isolated from Noise City. It was unknown where it was located. Klein's pupils dilated slightly as he looked at the clergyman with wrinkles and white hair. He asked in a deep voice, "Who are you?" The hunched clergyman replied in a condescending manner, "I'm an attendant by the Lord's side. I'm the angel of the Holy Word, Steph. I walk this land of the past that the Lord had passed on, doing so on his behalf in search of the blasphemer, hidden in the darkness." As he spoke, the elder's figure expanded to a height of 4 meters tall. Behind him, black illusory feathers appeared. Their shadows intersected and formed 4 pairs of gloomy but holy wings. Angel of the Holy Word, Steph. An attendant by the Lord's side. Land of the past. This is the blessed of the true Creator, the angel of fate's subordinate, a member of the Rose Redemption. It's no wonder that he can walk in the darkness, he has the power of degeneration protecting him. That evil God is still searching for the beyonder characteristic of the attendant of mysteries? Klein had no choice but to raise his head and lock eyes with this clergyman who, despite wearing a black robe, had 4 pairs of angel wings on his back. This high-level existence angel's form remained wrinkled with grizzled hair. There was a sense of contradiction in everything about him. Pretending that he had never made an enemy of the Aurora Order, he calmly said, "That blasphemer has long fled. I'm also searching for him." After staring at Klein for 2 seconds, the angel of the Holy Word asked in a low voice, "Who are you?" "It won't be convenient saying it out directly." Klein sighed and smiled. "I'm a lonely traveler." After he gave this reply, he suddenly felt an extreme sense of darkness developing within him. It then sank down and merged with the shadow created by the lantern. The pitch-black figure abruptly warped and came to life, stretching itself out to become another Gehrman sparrow, one with sinister and ferocious eyes and a solitary demeanor. This. Klein's pupils constricted. Without any hesitation, he reached out his right hand and grabbed outward at thin air. At this point, if he hadn't guessed that Steph was using his answer, he should have joined the Aurora Order and made the true Creator his God. At this moment, he already knew what it meant by angel of the Holy Word. This was clearly the angel of the evil word. By using a person's reply, he could extract a portion of the ambiguity or expand on it to create the effect of spirit language. When Klein said that he didn't know where the owner of the city had gone, Steph extracted the words, "I don't know where I went," trapping himself and isolating himself from the outside world. When this angel revealed his identity, every word was enhancing his level and strength. When Klein answered who he was, it ended up separating a lonely traveler from him. From the moment he appeared in Noise City, there was a strong sense of malice in the black-robed Steph. And just as Klein was attempting to summon a particular image from the historical void, the sinister Gehrman sparrow seemed to share the same thoughts as he did. He too grabbed at the same projection, canceling each other out. Seeing that his powers as a scholar of yore had been restrained, Klein's eyes narrowed. Without any hesitation, he opened his mouth and said a word in Jotun. But in the next second, the word was stolen. Standing at about 4 meters tall, the stooped angel of the Holy Word, Steph, had at some point in time grown a head covered in blood on his left shoulder. It looked very similar to him, but was much younger, a person who was approximately in the 40s. Around the head were 2 skinless arms that had mangled flesh. They had grazed different souls and had used beyonder powers that could steal thoughts. At the same time, another bloody head grew on Steph's right shoulder, one that looked to be in his 20s. Amongst the three heads, one grazed souls and stole Klein's thoughts, while the other was staring coldly at the target, deepening the self-awareness of the lonely traveler. The last one opened his mouth and said, "You lie. You are the person who destroyed the Son of God's descent ritual and interfered with the Lord's descent twice. You are one of the targets I'm looking for." The corners of Klein's mouth twitched as he calmly said a word in Jotun, Leodero. This was the true name of the Lord of Storms. The reason why this thought wasn't stolen was because he had lined up his subsequent actions. The lineup was filled with the same content. It didn't matter if the first thought was stolen, as it didn't affect the subsequent thoughts. This was a precious experience he had gained from fighting Amon. Of course, if he were to meet Amon again, he suspected that such a method might not work. Once the god of mischief was prepared, he would definitely come up with something new. As soon as he finished speaking, the eyes of the angel of the holy word angel, Steph, lit up with bolts of silver lightning. They covered the entirety of Noise City, and they tore through the darkness that enveloped the cathedral. They tore apart all the corruption, concealment, darkness, vileness, and evil. Inside, Klein and the sinister German Sparrow were situated at the eye of the lightning storm. Without even a grunt, they dissipated. Then, the terrifying, silvery white, twisted electric bolts snaked the area and swallowed the demonic wolf statue as well as the angel of holy words, Steph. Amidst the dull rumbling sounds, the ancient city of Noise completely collapsed, becoming a true ruin. At the opposite side of the dried-up riverbed, Klein's historical projection quickly faded away, returning to the real world. Right on the heels of that, Klein immediately used Flaming Jump to distance himself from the Noise ruins. During this process, he pulled out a few paper figurines and made them into angels to cover his tracks. The desolate plains returned to its state of dead silence once again. After an unknown period of time, the ruins where the cathedral stood shook. Steph slowly stood up amidst crumbling dust and rock. His completely white hair had thinned again, and his deep black clergyman's robe became tattered. The angel of the holy word left Noise ancient city in silence, got his bearings, and walked deep into the darkness. Half a day later, a figure approached the city's ruins from another direction. It was none other than Klein, who had made a huge detour. He hadn't had the chance to check the ancient city of Noise previously, and his return this time was motivated by the hope of finding actual clues of that existence. At a relatively far distance away, Klein repeated his observations above the gray fog, summoned the historical projection, and hid in ancient times, using the projection to summon another historical projection. After finishing his preparations, he stepped into Noise once again and returned to the cathedral in absolute silence. Along the way, the corpses that had been lying dead on the ground had either turned to ash or turned to charred remains, devoid of that creepy and harrowing feeling. That fellow named Steph didn't die. From the looks of it, the remnant divine powers of storm here can only injure an angel. Klein stopped in front of the ruined cathedral and muttered to himself wistfully. Of course, he only found it a little regretful. He didn't expect to finish off an angel so easily. As he swept his gaze, he saw a few pieces of the demonic wolf statue. The surface of it was dark black, and the insides were dark red, nothing like commonly seen stone. These stones must be extraordinary for them to be used by that dark demonic wolf for his statue. Furthermore, they don't look like something produced in the vicinity. Perhaps I can seek out the area the dark demonic wolf hid prior to Noise City by investigating them. As a miracle invoker, or even an attendant of mysteries, that dark demonic wolf must be good at covering his tracks. It'll be very difficult to track his whereabouts directly, but if I can find most of the areas he had hid previously, I should be able to gain insight into his habits and style. Once I know a person's past, I can predict his future. As he thought, he took 2 steps forward, bent down, and attempted to pick up a fragment of the statue. At that moment, a charred hand suddenly reached out and blocked his finger. From the corner of his eye, he saw a charred corpse standing up. The charred corpse's other hand held onto a crystal monocle and wore it on its left eye. Amon. Left eye. Klein's heart tightened at first before a strong sense of doubt and suspicion surfaced within him. In the next second, the charred corpse smiled and said, "Sorry, I wore it on the wrong side." As it spoke, it took off the monocle and moved it to its right eye. Chapter 1183 Klein's advantage. Once again, Klein understood why Amon was the god of mischief. At that moment, he didn't even have the desire to lampoon. All he wanted was to immediately end the historical projection and escape from the Amons, in front of him. The charred corpse that had been parasitized wiped the soot from its face. Before Klein disappeared, it said with a smile, "There's no rush. You are just a projection from the historical void. I can't really parasitize you, and you should know very well that I'm not alone. It's difficult for you to launch an effective counterattack." With a simple lantern in hand, Klein thought silently. He picked up a piece of the black sculpture fragment that had red insides, and he cautiously asked, "What exactly do you want to say?" At that moment, Amon had already changed back into his appearance. The only problem was that his skin remained darker. He adjusted his crystal monocle and chuckled. "You know that I'm aware that you're searching for that dark demonic wolf in an attempt to obtain the miracle invoker's beyonder characteristic from him. I happen to be very interested as well. Why don't we play another game and see who can get to it first?" "What's the point of that? It's not like I won't pursue it or think of snatching it if I don't play this game." After 2 seconds of silence, he shook his head. "I refuse." He had no intention of listening to what conditions Amon would offer. The more he heard from a top cheat, the more he would suffer. Amon shook his head without a hint of anger. "You'll regret this. I had originally planned to use a miracle invoker's beyonder characteristic to exchange for Sapphira Castle with you, and also give you a period of time to transfer the secret gathering you organized. And now, I can only consider stealing your fate directly. I will carry the burden of the corrosion from the source. Yes, although it's dangerous, it's still thrilling enough. I'm already prepared to accept it and see who will eventually control the flow. With my father's experience, I believe I won't perform too poorly." "What? Corrosion from the source? The experience of the ancient sun god?" Klein originally didn't wish to continue discussing the topic of the miracle invoker beyonder characteristic and Sapphira Castle, but when he heard that, his heart stirred. He recalled Amon's description and couldn't help but ask, "The source refers to the oldest one, the first creator?" He desperately wanted to know what sort of unbearable fate Sapphira Castle would bring him. Amon pinched the edge of his monocle and looked at him for a few seconds before suddenly smiling. "It's better if I don't answer this question directly, as you won't believe every word I say. Tell me, I'll determine its authenticity." Klein suppressed the urge to blurt out and calmly replied, "Maybe it's just because you haven't made up the reason yet." Amon didn't mind at all as he smiled and said, "You can think of it that way too. Heh, at times, the truth that you discover for yourself is definitely more agreeable than what others tell you. If you have the time, you can wander around the forsaken land of the gods. This should provide you with more clues. Of course, if you have the guts to enter Chernobyl, then you would know more." Klein didn't pursue the matter any further. After staring at the collapsed cathedral that was bathed in a faint yellow light, he casually said, "Did the dark demonic wolf hurriedly migrate because of the discovery of your existence?" Amon nodded slightly and said, "It wasn't just me. He've also sensed the hanged man's gaze. He has been hiding in the forsaken land of the gods for thousands of years. He is very sensitive to such matters. A Sequence 2 angel, perhaps even a sequence one angel, can only play hide and seek in the forsaken land of the gods and live such an abject life. Isn't the environment here a little too harsh? Klein sighed inwardly before saying, "You must have left more than one avatar in the City of Silver. Why didn't you try to stop me from reviving there? Why didn't you send more powerful avatars over?" Amon nudged the bottom of his monocle with his right index finger and laughed. "If that happens, you'll choose to revive in the outside world. This will cause quite a bit of trouble for my follow-up tracking. And if we were to relax a little, due to the existence of the miracle invoker beyonder characteristic in the forsaken land of the gods, you would most likely be resurrected here. In the following game, the only things that we need to consider are the Hanged Man and Ouroboros." "Just as I thought," Klein said after some thought. "Even in the same region, as long as you exceed a certain distance, your true body and avatars have no way to instantly merge or switch locations. Back when you first entered the forsaken land of the gods, you were able to transform back into your true form because the anomalies with Sapphira Castle had similarly interfered with the area here, allowing your true body to sense something. You went to the entrance in advance to wait?" After hearing what he said with a smile, Amon asked without answering, "What's your guess? Why don't you guess if I've turned back into my original form?" Klein raised his right fist and covered his mouth. After pondering for a few seconds, he revealed a smile. "I guess your other avatars are setting up a corresponding ritual to allow your true body to descend directly." Before he could finish his sentence, his figure rapidly turned incorporeal and dissipated. The historical void projection was dispelled. In the wilderness outside the ancient city of Noise, the air around the hiding Klein suddenly stirred. In midair, there were a series of illusory monocles. They stared at Klein's figure, as if saying that they had finally found him. However, Klein's figure rapidly faded away. Back when Amon moved the monocle to his right eye, Klein had already returned from ancient history to the real world. With the help of Paper Angel, he had used Flaming Jump and other Beyonder powers to quickly leave. The reason why his historical projection was able to speak to Amon rather normally was because he was essentially a marionette. It was Kona's Kilgore in the form of Gehrman Sparrow. He had a worm of spirit that came from history inside him and was controlled by Klein's projection outside the city. Meanwhile, in the process of escaping far away, Klein frequently entered the historical void, allowing the projection outside the city to intermittently regain consciousness and maintain control of his marionette. This caused the person who had spoken to Amon to fall into deep thought from time to time. He would either stare with a focused look for a few seconds or seemingly need time to recall what Amon had said. Against the god of deceit, Klein didn't dare to be careless. After leaving Noise City, he circled around 2 more times and used his true vision to inspect his surroundings above the gray fog. Only then did he slow down. The corrosion that comes from the source. I wonder if Amon is bluffing me. Indeed, I'll have to enter Chernobyl one day to take a look, but I have to become a miracle invoker, doing so after I have self-preservation abilities to a certain degree, otherwise, I'll just be knocking on death's door. With the lantern that Danitz had sacrificed, Klein casually proceeded in the dark environment of the weeds. Thanks to this experience, he finally had a deeper understanding of the danger in the forsaken land of the gods. Extremely harsh and warped environment, crazy cultists, fallen angel, groups of almonds wandering about, and mythical creatures lurking in the darkness. Somewhere here, there are evil gods watching everything. I can stir remnant divine powers that others can as well. As expected of the forsaken land of the gods. The danger level far exceeds my imagination. As he sighed, he turned his attention back to the dark demonic wolf. To be frank, he didn't think he had any advantage in tracking this mythical creature. Be it his understanding of the forsaken land of the gods, or his confidence in the target situation, he was far inferior to Amon, who had been exploring the area for more than 1,000 years, as well as the true creators blessed who had the benefit of this place being their home ground. My only advantage is that I share the same seer pathway as the dark demonic wolf. Furthermore, I have Sapphira Castle. There is a strong inclination for beyonder characteristic convergence. This will have a certain effect on fate and judgment. However, Amon is a king of angels of a neighboring pathway. There is also the law of beyonder characteristic convergence between him and the dark demonic wolf. The effects won't be any weaker than mine. Klein considered carefully for a moment when he suddenly had an idea. He found his best advantage. The advantage was, he was very weak. Compared to Amon, the true creator's attendant, and the dark demonic wolf, he was very weak. Under normal circumstances, this was a disadvantage, but at times, it was possible that it could bring him something that he wanted. My level is low, and I'm weak. That means that I can become the hunting target of the dark demonic wolf instead. It's very difficult for me to find him, so why don't I get him to come and find me instead? A scholar of your might not necessarily interest the dark demonic wolf, but if this scholar of your can still trigger Sapphira Castle, that's a whole other matter. I can stir Sapphira Castle from time to time, leaving behind traces of the grey fog's aura as bait for the dark demonic wolf. The more he thought, the more viable he believed it was. Of course, this was definitely very dangerous. If he wasn't careful, he might accidentally bait Amon or even the true creator. And the dark demonic wolf might very likely choose to observe first before suddenly launching an attack and not giving him a chance to prepare. Before taking this approach, I have to make sufficient preparations. There's no need to rush it. Taking a deep breath, Klein reached out his hand and pulled out the black demonic wolf sculpture's fragment that was red on the inside. Although he had failed to obtain the item due to Amon's obstruction, this didn't stop him from taking it out from the historical void. This was because he had already seen it and had touched it. And the item itself wasn't at a high level. At this moment, he wanted to use the fragment to search for the hiding spot of the dark demonic wolf by analyzing it in reverse and figuring out its modus operandi. In the wilderness ruled by darkness, Klein lifted the lantern that emitted a faint yellow light. He got his bearings and changed directions before slowly entering Backlund, Hillston Borough. Furs, who had gone out traveling once, finally received a reply from her teacher, Dorian Gray Abraham. Chapter 1184 Record, there are no worms of star at the moment. He wants me to take note of what else the person who's seeking to purchase a worm of star needs. Furs read the letter from her teacher and silently heaved a sigh of relief. However, when she thought about how she was about to begin hunting the Saint of Secrets, she felt a pang of nervousness. After all, he was a demigod, a saint who had reached Sequence for about 1 or 2 years ago. It was unknown if he was already at Sequence 3 now. Although the mastermind behind the operation is Mam Hermit, as the bait, I still need to worry about my own safety. Besides, the Aurora Order still has Rose Redemption backing them, as well as angels and a King of Angels. Furs didn't regret agreeing to Gehrman Sparrow's request. This was something she had wanted to do in the first place. However, due to the high risk involved, it was inevitable for her to feel flustered and uneasy. This made her think of another possibility: if Mr. World could participate in the operation and lead it, I'll definitely feel less nervous and worried. It wasn't that Furs didn't believe in Mam Hermit's strength and experience, but that the results from the World Gehrman Sparrow were laid bare for all to see. His hunts didn't include 1 or 2 demigods, so having him run the operation would make one feel at ease. Zio, who was sitting beside the fireplace, glanced at her friend and asked, "Is the hunt about to begin?" "Yes." Furs nodded solemnly before saying, "It won't be too soon. Everyone needs some time to prepare." Hunting a demigod wasn't akin to fox hunting in the suburbs during autumn. Setting off wasn't as simple as bringing the equipment and gathering friends. This required a precise and meticulous plan. Furs believed that Mam Hermit had to come to Backlund personally, or live in another kill box that she had decided on for some time. Only by figuring out the exact situation could she come up with an effective plan. As for Miss Justice, she was still speeding up the digestion of her Dreamwalker potion. This might take another 1 to 2 months or even longer. For Furs, she could afford to wait. She also wanted to finish digesting her scribe potion, set up the ritual, and become a traveler before the actual operation began. The only thing she wasn't sure of was whether the world would rush them. I will try my best to convince him. No, let Miss Justice convince him. That's what a spectator is best at. Just as Furs mumbled, she saw Xiao turn around and hesitantly say, "The liaison officer from MI9 suggested that I should officially join them today. And they said that, with the new king in place, there are many matters from the past that I don't need to worry about. People like me and him have the chance to have importance placed on them again." Furs listened attentively and said after some deliberation, "That isn't some sort of investigation that's targeted at us, right? This will likely make them discover that there's a faction behind you." Xiao nodded and said, "They believe that I was abandoned after that incident. Also, they suspect that that faction belongs to a church, the Church of Evernight." Xiao believed in the Evernight goddess, so mentioning the church was undoubtedly referring to the Church of Evernight. However, considering that her good friend was a believer in the god of steam and machinery, she made an emphasis to prevent any ambiguity. "Heh, that's what Mr. World told us to disguise ourselves as." Furs stroked her hair with a relaxed expression and said with a smile. She then made herself look serious and mature. "Xiao, this is an opportunity for you. Acting as a judge clearly requires the support of the officials. Your current strength and level aren't enough to be a judge in the underground world in Backland. You also lack sufficient support. If you can really enter a court of law, rotate between the different courts, and serve in a criminal court for a few months, your potion should be completely digested. Oh right, I heard that MI9 has a paranormal court within it, one which specializes in beyonder cases. If you become a judge there, you might be able to attempt to be a disciplinary paladin by February or March next year." Seeing Xiao clearly being moved by her speech, Furs hurriedly added, "Once you make enough contributions, you might be able to restore your father's reputation to a certain extent. Anyway, George III is already dead. As long as it doesn't affect his reputation, Jevington too might not stop it." Jevington was the eldest son of George III. He had worn the crown as Balam's emperor and was now the new king of Lone. Xiao fell silent for a while before she slowly nodded. "I'll give it a try. Yes, after things settle down, you can bring your mother and brother to Backland. Although the situation is tense now and food prices are rapidly rising, you definitely get food rations from MI9. You can provide for them." The more Furs spoke, the more she felt that joining MI9 was a good thing. After persuading Xiao, Furs entered her bedroom and prayed to Mr. Fool, asking him to forward her message to Mr. World. Immediately following that, Furs extracted the important points of her teacher's reply and described her thoughts, hoping that Gehrman Sparrow could be more patient. Just as she finished her prayers and was about to leave the room, her vision suddenly blurred. She saw a crimson tide surge out of the void, instantly drowning her. Furs immediately discovered that she had arrived in the ancient palace and was sitting on her usual high-back chair. However, there was no towering figure that was shrouded in grey fog at the long, bronze table seat of honor. At that moment, there was only her and the world Gehrman Sparrow around the long model table. Furs's mind suddenly tensed up as her thoughts raced suddenly. "Mr. World, I meant, just now, that it's best if you have some patience. This will make things simpler. It's actually fine if you don't. We will begin hunting as soon as possible." Klein let out a soft chuckle. "Don't worry, I'm not in a hurry." When his ultimate goal had become an angel-level potion formula and grade 0 sealed artifacts, he had enough patience regarding this matter. Phew. Furs secretly heaved a sigh of relief and asked curiously, "Then why did you look for me?" Klein replied calmly, "Didn't you wish to digest the scribe potion as quickly as possible? Apart from the customs of different places, I think you still need to record all kinds of beyonder powers. The higher the corresponding level, the better the digestion's effect." Furza's eyes lit up when she heard that. Yes. Yes. After blurting it out, she found her attitude highly questionable. She hurriedly and fearfully added, "Is this the advance payment you mentioned before?" Klein nodded slightly and said, "Let's begin. Be prepared. I've borrowed a grade 1 sealed artifact from Mr. Fool. It corresponds to the level of a saint. To a sequence 6 scribe, the chances of successfully recording an angel-level beyonder power was extremely low, nearly impossible. Therefore, Klein didn't attempt to summon Miss Messenger and Mr. Azek from the historical void to showcase their skills. Furs sat up straight and nodded heavily. Yes. In the next second, she saw the world Gehrman sparrow raise a white bone scepter covered in blue gems. Amidst the bright light, bolts of lightning leaped out of the void and interwove together, forming a forest of lightning that emitted an aura of destruction. Furza's eyes turned silvery white as her body and mind were left in awe. After the lightning storm calmed down, she was stunned for 2 seconds before timidly saying, "It failed, again," Klein calmly replied. Lightning storm descended again and again in the ancient palace above the grey fog. After an unknown period of time, Furs exhaled and leaned back in her chair. She couldn't hide her joy as she said, "It's a success. It's a success," she had finally recorded lightning storm once. "It's finally over." Furs immediately relaxed. Then, she heard the world say without emotion, "All right, next beyonder power, next." Furs saw the crazy adventurer at the bottom of the long, model table extend his right hand and grab at the grayish-white fog. Out of nowhere, he took out a long, thorny cross that was covered in bronze. Record this cross's ability? Furs tried hard to make her expression appear normal. After she digested the scribe potion to a certain extent, the godhood powers that she could record had increased from 1 to 2. No. Klein glanced at Miss Magician and said, "Record my summoning of the unshadowed crucifix." "It failed," Furs said softly. The reason for her failure this time was that she didn't have time to record it. Dispelling the maintenance of unshadowed crucifix, Klein once again reached into the fog of history and pulled out an iron-black revolver. "It didn't succeed," Furs replied with a complicated expression. All she wanted to do now was to return to the real world and digest what she had just received, but the ringing of the bell to mark the end of class just didn't happen. Nearly 30 times later, when Furza's head throbbed in pain and her mental strength was beginning to run dry, she finally recorded historical void summoning once. At that moment, she felt her tears fill her eyes, but she still held back her fatigue and tried her best to show the attitude of a good student. This can summon people and objects that one is related to through the historical void? When the time comes, who should I summon, or what item should I summon? Klein looked at Miss Magician and coldly replied, "Me." Furs forced a smile and asked, "From which period?" "The last time we met." Klein had already thought of an answer. It was the him who had deliberately sent Miss Magician back from the world of ice and snow to Backland before he destroyed George III's ritual. He had already become a scholar of yore by then. Furs nodded solemnly and subconsciously asked, "What if I fail?" For me to summon someone who exceeds my own level, the probability of failure should be very high. Come again tomorrow to record this ability. Use Lamano's travels, Klein said calmly. Will 2 times be enough to succeed? Furs instinctively had such a question. However, she didn't dare to speak when she saw how certain the world Gehrman sparrow was about it. She raised her hand and gestured. "Then, can I go back now?" With a terse answer, he allowed Miss Magician to leave Sapphira Castle with a delighted expression. In a primitive forest on Sonia Island. Alger Wilson led his subordinates into an elven ruin that was seldom visited. Chapter 1185 Reappearing. The withered vines drooped down, covering the rotting wooden structure. The entire ruins had been frozen in a silent atmosphere that no one had tread within for a while. Alger and a few sailors circled around the ruin in the environment of a withering winter, but they still failed to discover anything of value. "Captain, batches of adventurers have come here before. What else could they have left us?" Finally, a sailor in his 30s impatiently broke the silence. This resonated with his other companions as they echoed, "A place that didn't take us much time to learn about can definitely be easily found by others." That's right, that's right. Let's continue to fuck the Phasacians. "Captain, are you trying to make this place a stronghold?" Alger slowly scanned the area, quelling the sailors to stop their complaints under his gaze and making them choose to obey. After a few seconds of silence, he said, "I plan on using this place to ambush the Phasacians. Let's observe the terrain and see if it's suitable." With such an excuse, the sailors barely perked up, and the group quickly entered the depths of the elven ruins. As he walked, Alger's spiritual perception was triggered as he subconsciously looked behind a gigantic tree. There were some signs of churning in the soil over there, and it wouldn't take more than a year. Alger retracted his gaze and pretended not to notice anything amiss. He naturally looked elsewhere. After exploring the elven ruins, they returned to their new camp. At that moment, it was almost evening and the forest was getting colder. Alger had dinner with the sailors before leaving 2 patrolling guards behind, and then all of them entered their respective tents. The cold wind blew through the trees, causing the bonfire to sway. Alger, who had wanted to leave the campsite in the middle of the night, suddenly heard faint singing from afar. The voice was ethereal, like a woman humming and singing slowly, relating her inner thoughts. This made Alger involuntarily recall the past. He recalled his mother who had long passed away, and the days when he was a bullied child. Indescribable grief surged from the bottom of his heart, preventing him from waking up immediately. He waited for a few seconds before he suddenly sat up, frowning and listening. This time, he didn't hear anything. That melodious voice seemed to have never happened. Alger narrowed his eyes, grabbed his thick jacket, and put it on. He walked out of the tent and came to the bonfire. The 2 sailors in charge of night duty had just finished their patrol and were drawing warmth from it. "Did you discover anything unusual?" Alger asked in a deep voice. The 2 strong, vigorous sailors shook their heads. "No." Alger's brows relaxed a little as he turned around, intending to make his own rounds. At this moment, he noticed something from the corner of his eye. The 2 sailors were too close. If it were any ordinary pirate, this wouldn't have been a problem. However, Alger's subordinates had undergone formal training through the Church of the Lord of Storms. They definitely knew that, in such an environment, the patrol team had to maintain a certain distance from each other. They couldn't be too far or too close. They had to be able to see their companions, as well as prevent themselves from being taken away at the same time from a single assault. Alger took 2 steps without batting an eyelid. He turned back and casually asked, "Did you discover anything normal?" He had changed the question and made it appear very strange. The 2 strong sailors shook their heads and replied without changing their expressions, "No. No." Alger nodded slightly with a relaxed expression. "Very good." He turned around and slowly walked into his tent. The moment the sailors' attention on him was cut off, Alger drew out the blade of poison and the gargoyle glasses. He opened his mouth and prepared to belt out a song. At that moment, the ethereal voice from before appeared once again. It echoed in Alger's ears and pierced into his mind. This was an extremely ancient folk song, spelling out an extreme sense of sadness and melancholy through the singing. It made Alger's spirit body produce pale, non-existent arms that constantly tore at him. Alger's expression twisted as his skin began to produce slippery, black fish scales. His dark blue hair stood up one by one as they became abnormally thick. The thoughts that originally existed in his mind were disrupted by the song and were cut off by the pain. They were unable to take form any further. Alger fell and struggled on the ground. He squirmed, becoming less and less like a human as he was pushed to the brink of losing control. Suddenly, the singing stopped. A slightly indifferent voice entered Alger's ears, "Some elven blood. Then, that shall be all. Use Xiaotas's Beyonder characteristic well." Alger's forehead was covered in cold sweat as he slowly got up. He didn't know when a figure had appeared in the tent. It was a woman with black hair and exquisite facial features. Her ears were slightly pointy, and her eyes were deep. Her facial features were soft, and she wore a complicated and ancient long dress. Even though she didn't have the advantage in height, she still gave off an air of superiority. "Are you the elf queen, Queen of Calamity Kohinum?" A thought flashed through Alger's mind as he took the initiative to ask. The woman played with a beautifully decorated golden cup and calmly said, "Haven't you already met me?" Alger suddenly recalled the similar singing he had heard on Pasu Island. He recalled seeing a high elf when he entered the underwater coral palace. After a few seconds of silence, Alger said in a deep voice, "You're actually still alive." At the same time, he silently recited Mr. Fool's honorific name in his heart, but he didn't know if it would be effective if he didn't recite it out loud. The black-haired woman's expression remained unchanged as she replied, "It's very difficult for an angel to perish without encountering an enemy." "Then why did you split the characteristics and place yourself to be in a strange state? This makes you need to wait for an opportunity to be resurrected." Alger had learned of the corresponding situation at the Tarot Club, and now, he was asking out of curiosity, partly to stall for time. The elven lady suspected to be Queen of Calamity Kohinum snorted. "Because the divine throne for Storm is occupied by Leodoro, and I have no way of resisting the tyrant. Also, the elves are dwindling in numbers. My anchors are becoming increasingly unstable." Other people might not know who Leodoro was, but Alger knew very well. He didn't dare continue this topic in the real world. Just as he was about to ask the Queen of Calamity Kohinum's goal for coming, the Elf Queen said, "Do you want to become a demigod? She wants to use my body to revive. She wants to use my wish to advance to sequence 4 and obtain godhood as bait to intrude my body." While Alger was tempted, questions arose in his mind. Considering how Mr. Fool could cleanse all kinds of corruption, Alger acutely felt that this was an opportunity. This made him recall a term Emperor Roselle had once mentioned, a Trojan horse. And now, he had a high chance of bringing in the Trojan horse and throwing out the invaders within. "What do you want me to do?" Alger didn't appear too anxious as he raised a question based on his personality. Queen of Calamity Kohinum observed him for a few seconds before saying, "When you have the right to make contact with the Book of Calamity, take out something that no one else will notice, and take it to the Western Continent." The Western Continent. The legendary homeland of the elves? Alger frowned slightly and said, "Hasn't the Western Continent already disappeared?" The corners of Kohinum's lips curled up slightly. "Since it disappeared, it will reappear again. It will definitely appear again when the apocalypse happens." Without waiting for Alger to ask further, the Elf Queen paused and said, "You don't have to personally send that item to the Western Continent, but you have to entrust someone trustworthy. Although I'm not skilled at curses, I can still make you die in pain from breaking our agreement. But what if the Western Continent doesn't appear again, or if it can't be entered?" Alger thought seriously for a moment. Kohinum, with her gentle gaze and lustrous raven-black hair, seemed to be lost in beautiful memories. After a few seconds, she calmly said, "If it really doesn't appear again, then the agreement shall be null and void. Perhaps entering the Western Continent requires an incantation or command, but I do not know what it is. However, you can ask a particular existence." Who? Alger asked, puzzled. Kohainam glanced at him and coldly said, "The Mr. Fool you were chanting in your heart just now. I have a feeling that he is the key to this matter." Alger's heart tightened as he hurriedly lowered his head in response. "I understand." Seeing this, Queen of Calamity Kohainam nodded slightly and said, "If you wish to become a demigod and abide by this agreement, you can head to the elven ruins when the sun rises." After the voice fell, the elf queen's figure quickly dissipated, like a mirage that was often seen at sea and in the desert. Alger suddenly opened his eyes and realized that he was lying in a tent, having just woken up. His memories were in a mess, but he quickly regulated them. He and his sailors had just found the location of an elven ruin and had yet to explore it. The previous exploration, singing, sailor anomalies, and appearance and conversation with Calamity were all just a dream. It's no wonder I was so careless. Even though I knew that I might encounter the Queen of Calamity, I didn't pray to Mr. Fool first. The Queen of Calamity relied on her status as an angel to create this realistic dream? Or perhaps, she has a corresponding sealed artifact. Even if she exists in a special state, she still has the means to use her powers. Alger listened to the commotion outside the tent, and he realized that everything was normal. He then sat down and prayed sincerely to Mr. Fool. In just 20 to 30 seconds, Alger arrived above the gray fog and saw Mr. Fool sitting at the end of the long, model table. "You met Kohainam?" After the hanged man greeted him, the Fool Klein spoke casually. Alger answered seriously, "Yes, but I can't be sure that it's the Elf Queen." Chapter 1186 Opportunity and Danger are two sides of the same coin. The fool acknowledged softly and didn't deny the hanged man's guess, nor was he certain that it was Queen of Calamity Kohainam. After all, it was impossible for him to take out a gold coin in front of him and perform a divination on the spot. Alger waited for a few seconds. Seeing no clear response from Mr. Fool, he quickly went into greater detail about what he had said in the prayer. From the woman suspected to be Queen of Calamity Kohainam saying that he had some elven blood in him, to how she gave him a promise of becoming a demigod, as well as the key to the Western continent and the completion of the agreement. After recounting everything, Alger shut his mouth and lowered his head, not daring to directly ask Mr. Fool what he thought. He obediently waited for the great existence to speak. Some elven blood. Send something from the Book of Calamity to the Western continent. The missing Western continent might reappear again. The Western continent. The Fool Klein listened quietly. He closed his eyes and calmly said, "This is very dangerous, but this is also an opportunity for you." He had already gained initial control of Sapphira Castle, and the power he could mobilize had reached the level of a Sequence 2 angel. As for Queen of Calamity Kohainam, she couldn't be higher than this level, therefore, he was quite confident that he could resist the various accidents brought about by the Elf Queen. It was precisely because of this that he dared to claim it to be an opportunity for the hanged man. Of course, the prerequisite for grasping the opportunity was that the hanged man wasn't rash or went overboard. He had to constantly remember to ask for protection at all times. Therefore, Klein specially emphasized that it was very dangerous. He wanted the hanged man to remember to pray to Mr. Fool before he took action. This short sentence had two meanings to it, but he believed that Mr. Hanged Man would definitely understand it. Alger was delighted as he replied rather sincerely, as though he had learned from the sun, "My faith lies only with Mr. Fool." These words made Klein feel uneasy as he remembered the pain of being drowned by endless lightning. He could only smile without saying a word. Alger deliberated for a moment before asking, "Honorable Mr. Fool, what are the incantations or commands needed to enter the Western continent?" "I would like to know that too." The Fool Klein sighed and said, "It's not time for you to know." "Yes, Mr. Fool." Alger didn't ask further as he bowed respectfully. When he returned to the real world, he immediately walked out of the tent and led his sailors out. Under the light of the morning sun, he spent a certain amount of time reaching the elven ruin. The scene here was identical to what he had seen in his dream. The withered vines covered the decaying wooden structure, and there were some areas where the text on monuments could be seen. The air seemed to have frozen, as though no one had stepped in for a long time. Looking around, Alger suddenly thought of a question. How was he to face the church after he really relied on the Queen of Calamity to become a demigod? Directly rebel, becoming the 5th king over the 5 seas, no, the 6th king? But this way, I won't have a chance to come into contact with the Book of Calamity. Unless I design a situation that forces the church to use this sealed artifact that might have been labeled as Grade 0 without my knowledge. That will not only be very difficult, but I have to become a Sea King, or even a Calamity to succeed. Yes, I can request the world's help. If I wish to continue staying in the church, I have to give them a reason that they cannot ignore but is sufficiently believable. Alger frowned slightly without hiding his solemnity. In the eyes of the sailors who followed him, this was a sign that he was worried about the ruin. As his thoughts churned, Alger gradually came up with ideas. There are many books in the church that have records of people turning into demigods due to a fortuitous encounter. 2/3 of them were invaded by evil gods and devils and eventually lost their lives in the purification process. However, 1/3 of them passed the test and became a high-ranking deacon or a cardinal. Now that the war has broken out, the situation in Lone is tense. As long as there aren't any problems during the investigation, the church wouldn't mind having an additional sequence for demigod as cannon fodder. Then, I can slowly gain their trust later. The prerequisite for all of this is that the Queen of Calamity hasn't truly attempted to corrupt me or left a mark on me. Considering the various sealed artifacts in the church's possession, I have to pray for Mr. Fool's blessings ahead of time. According to Miss Justice, Angel's Embrace can effectively hide one's true thoughts and tests in one's dream. With the members of the Tarot Club beginning to become demigods or about to become demigods, Alger really didn't wish to be lining the bottom of the barrel. Just like in the past, he had done so many things in the church, all for the sake of being superior to others. Now, he was naturally willing to take a certain risk. With this decision, Alger immediately led his sailors into the ruins and began exploring the path in his dreams. This time, he didn't split his subordinates into small teams. On the one hand, he was worried that an accident might occur, and on the other hand, he hoped that they could all be his witness. After 15 minutes, Alger and his crew arrived beside the giant tree that had signs of its soil being churned. Before he could survey his surroundings, his vision blurred, and he saw a gorgeous palace made up of coral. Above the palace was a layer of deep blue seawater that rippled outwards. Giant pillars stood tall and held up an exaggerated dome. It was tall and beautiful, but also dark and gloomy. Alger looked around and realized that all the sailors beside him had disappeared. He immediately knew that he might have been pulled into an illusion. He took a silent breath and slowly walked into the coral palace. There were many elves inside. They were either roasting fish or placing spices in the coagulated animal blood. Their choice of utensil was 2 tree branches to bring the food to their mouths. None of them minded the entrance of a stranger. Alger then cast his gaze to the 9-staired stairs 100 meters away. On the steps, there was a coral throne inlaid with sapphires, emerald, and lustrous pearls. The elf queen, Queen of Calamity, was sitting there, looking down at Alger. Very good. Kohinam nodded and threw out the exquisite gold wine glass. The gentle but resilient wind held the wine cup in its embrace and, like tiny pixies in a line, carried the corresponding items towards Alger. Alger reached out to receive it and looked down. He discovered that there was a blue liquid inside the golden cup. It was incorporeal, dreamy, and surreal. Drink it, and then head to the waters near the Simeem island of the Rorstad archipelago. Find this coral palace. The thing you want is inside. If I don't drink this wine, I won't be able to see that palace. Alger asked thoughtfully. Although he was facing an angel, he was still able to communicate rather calmly. This was because he met a mighty figure every week and was already used to this situation. Queen of Calamity Kohainam nodded and said, "That's right. Will you leave a mark on me?" Alger asked cautiously. "Yes," Kohainam said coldly. "So, before entering the Coral Palace and obtaining the corresponding items, you can't return to Pasu Island. You can't meet the angels under Leodoro. The pontiff can't be met even if I want to." Alger heaved a sigh of relief inwardly before asking, "After I get hold of that item, the effect of this wine will disappear?" Elf Queen Kohainam replied without any change in expression, "No, you need to directly consume that characteristic. When the time comes, this wine will transform into a seal, allowing that characteristic to temporarily not invade your body. How you prepare the ritual and explain this to the Church of Storms will be up to you. Let the characteristic belong to me first before holding the ritual. This way, there might be a better way for the Church to accept it." Alger thought for a moment before raising his hand to bring the wine cup to his lips. The ice-cold liquid slid down his throat and disappeared in a blink of an eye. The entire Coral Palace shattered as the light of dawn and the remnants of the gigantic green tree reappeared in front of Alger. "You didn't sign a contract or get me to swear an oath?" "Yes, drinking that cup of wine is equivalent to making an agreement." Alger retracted his gaze and said to the surrounding sailors who were unaware, "There's nothing here. Let's go deeper and take a look." In the ancient palace above the fog. Klein also retracted his gaze from the crimson star representing the hanged man and nodded thoughtfully. "That's Siata's and Mobit's grave. I never expected that golden wine cup to have such an effect. That is indeed Elf Queen Kohainam. How's her present condition?" "Half of it is in the Book of Calamity, while the other is hiding somewhere unknown." "She was using the golden wine cup or the characteristic to influence reality?" "Mr. Hanged Man hasn't been contaminated for the time being. I'll wait for him to head to the Rorstad archipelago before making another assessment." As his true body had a limited amount of time left in the historical void, Klein didn't stay any longer, and he returned to the pitch-black wilderness. He carried the lantern that emitted a faint yellow light as he walked towards a certain location. As he walked, he turned his head to look east, which was symbolic of where Chernobyl was. His footsteps slowed down involuntarily. "Once I gather sufficient information from the dark demonic wolf's former hiding spots, I'll head east. I'll walk all the way until I reach the boundary and confirm the situation. Then, I'll consider the matter of the miracle invoker beyond her characteristic. Amon probably wouldn't expect that I would suddenly leave. He definitely knows the past of the dark demonic wolf. It's impossible for him to do the same kinds of investigations that I'll be doing. Yes, but he will definitely be tracking me." Klein exhaled slowly and sped up his pace. A bolt of lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the dark and red desolate plains. Raindrops began dripping down intermittently. Klein dragged out a black umbrella from the historical void. With one hand holding an umbrella and the other holding the lantern, he proceeded alone. About a week later, the future was docked somewhere along the long lone coastline. Katlia held a stack of tarot cards in her hand and said to the sailors, "Nina and company, I'll be staying in Lone for some time. All of you have to watch Frank and prevent him from doing his strange experiments." Chapter 1187 Change. Upon hearing the captain's instructions, Nina pouted and pointed out the window. "Are any of Frank's experiments not strange?" Katlia was momentarily at a loss for words. All she could do was sigh and say, "If there are any signs of danger, write to me immediately." As a mysticologist, she also had her own messenger. "All right." Nina puffed her chest out and said, "If there's anything to blame, it's solely because I'm the most mature and reliable person on the future." Having said that, she asked curiously, "Captain, what are you doing in Lone? What mission did you take on? Are you going to engage in some sabotage raids behind enemy lines? Nina was of Phaeacian descent, and she was considered half Intis. She naturally had some inclinations in the recent war, therefore, she guessed that her captain had established contact with Intis's intelligence department. You could say that, Katlia replied sternly. In a sense, Nina's guess wasn't wrong. She had indeed taken on a mission and was dealing damage in Lone's capital, Backlund. However, her target wasn't an official faction, but a cultist. Furthermore, there's still a chance to meet the Queen. She probably hasn't left Backlund yet, and the earliest she'll leave is probably after the new year. Upon thinking of this, Katlia suddenly felt a little excited. Ever since she left the Dawn, she hadn't really met Queen Mystic. She only had letters to communicate with her, or despite being on the same boat, they didn't communicate with one another for some reason. Nina didn't dare to press further as she pointed to the door and said, "Captain, is there anything else? If not, we'll leave." Katlia nodded, indicating that this future bosun could leave with her subordinates. Just as Nina held the handle and gently twisted it, Katlia suddenly recalled something and hurriedly shouted, "Nina." Nina, whose blonde hair was tied into a high ponytail, turned around with a confused expression. "Don't drink," Katlia emphasized seriously. "When I return to the ship, you'll be allowed to have your fill." Nina immediately revealed a charming smile. "Deal." Katlia thought for a moment before exhorting, "Apart from Frank, you have to take note of Heath's condition. Don't let him generate curiosity towards unknown voices, and don't let him be overly exhausted. Also, pull Ottolov out of his room frequently, and control the frequency and times he interacts with mysticism knowledge. Also, I know. Don't I know them all too well?" Nina waved her hand and agreed. After the bosun and her subordinates left the captain's cabin and closed the door behind them, Katlia cast her gaze out the window to look at the currently invisible Backlund. After a few minutes, she took out a tarot card from the deck in her hand. It depicted a lonely old man with a glass lantern and a staff, the hermit card. Late at night, Backlund, Empress Borough, Earl Hall's house. Audrey, who was wearing a white silk nightgown, suddenly opened her eyes. She took a blue cloak and draped it over her body. She then got out of bed and walked to the full-body mirror in the room. Through the crimson moonlight shining through the curtains, she carefully observed herself. Her pair of emerald-green eyes seemed to glow brightly and limpid. It was so clear that one could clearly see every detail. Audrey closed her eyes. By the time she opened them again, all the abnormalities had vanished. The corners of her mouth curled up bit by bit, and a small depression appeared on her face. Her eyes curved slightly as she silently praised herself. "Audrey, you've finally come this far." She had completely digested the Dreamwalker potion. According to her confidence in herself, and her predictions, she had originally believed that it would take until February for her to digest the potion. To her surprise, she had encountered many strange and completely different dreams recently. This included many dreams within dreams, dreams that were a result of a mental illness, lucid dreams, dreams caused by the influence of evil spirits and wraiths, and the dreams of a few demigods. Under normal circumstances, as a dreamwalker, Audrey could generally determine the creature's level when entering a dream, thus avoiding danger. However, those demigods had hidden themselves very well. Only when she entered their dreams did she realize that something was amiss and nearly jumped in fright. Fortunately, she wasn't discovered all those times. She ended up accumulating experience, and she began carefully touring, traveling, observing, and analyzing in the demigod's dreams, allowing her to greatly digest her potion. In addition, the other special dreams gave her a completely different experience. After that, she attempted creating multiple dreams within dreams. Some attempted to hide behind the scenes in her dreams and guide them in an ingenious manner to develop and interfere with the subconscious in a reverse manner. She treated the mental illness of the owners of the dreams, or the corruption caused by an evil spirit or wraith. To a certain extent, she had gone against the requirements of only observing, recording, and not making any interference. Yet, this strangely accelerated the digestion of the potion. This made her conclude a new principle: if you really want to interfere, then be the mastermind and conductor behind the scenes. It's so that even if the goal succeeds, no one will notice it. This was something that Audrey had done very well. The few people with serious mental illnesses had unknowingly recovered after having 5 or 6 strange dreams. And it was very normal for a dream to appear strange and incomprehensible. To be able to digest the Dreamwalker potion so quickly, it's mainly a result of my good luck recently. Without so many unique experiences, I'd definitely have to wait another month or 2. Yes, I might even be caught by a demigod and be thrown into a Beyonder prison or directly be killed. When did my luck become so good? It seems like it started after I sacrificed the ice cream to that Fate Domain's angel, his blessed. Audrey looked at her reflection and blinked her eyes with a smile. She quickly retracted her gaze, scanned her bedroom, and walked to the dressing table. Sitting on it was a deck of cards. In a room of a girl who enjoyed mysticism, it was normal for her to have a deck of tarot cards. Audrey stretched out her right hand and touched the card at the top with her fingertip. She slowly took a deep breath and muttered to herself, "The fighting at the Amantha mountain range is getting more intense." Mid-Seashire had already lost a port. It said that the defenses of the Hornacis mountain range in Civilous County can't last until spring. If not for the fact that we have gained a significant advantage at sea, our connection with the southern continent's East Balam would have surely been severed. Alfred is still there. I wonder how this war will develop. Thankfully, I'm about to become a demigod. Mr. World has already given me the manipulator's potion formula and main ingredient. The 7 drops of tears that were shed from intense human emotions have also been found during my dream experience recently. The tree mentor's golden leaves were obtained via a trade with Little Sunday. I'm just short of the blood of an elderly mine dragon. Phew, I'll try to trade for it with the psychology alchemists. Before Vin Rambus died, I was already the person in charge of a small psychological discussion group. But will this reveal that Vin Rambis's death has something to do with me? Or could I get Mr. World to summon the blood of an elderly mine dragon from history? This can last for at least 15 minutes. When I succeed in advancing, I'll converge my spirituality and complete my queuing. Its disappearance will not affect anything. After all, it's just a supplementary material. Audrey, you actually learned how to fake things. What's more, it's on such matters. After a self-deprecating comment, Audrey began to think about the kind of situation to use to complete the advancement ritual of a manipulator. The ritual required one to drink the potion while in the midst of an emotional resonance generated during a special occasion with at least 10,000 people. As her thoughts raced, Audrey came up with a preliminary idea: the goddess's Winter Gifts Day? But no matter how large a mass is, it can't accommodate 10,000 people. The cathedral can't accommodate so many people. Yes, it's usually impossible. If there's a chance, I can donate a sum of money. I can suggest we do an extremely large mass in Memorial Square so as to placate the souls that passed away during the war. In the most important square, the family members, relatives, and friends of the deceased are invited. As long as they accommodate a certain proportion of the participants, the emotions that resonate will affect the others who are participating in mass, allowing the ritual's requirements to be satisfied. After calmly analyzing the situation, Audrey suddenly bowed her head and looked at the mirror on the dressing table. She saw that the faint smile on her beautiful face had long disappeared, leaving behind only calmness and sadness in her eyes. She stared at herself, her lips curling up slightly as she whispered, "Audrey, you've become despicable, closing her eyes and opening them again, Audrey had returned to normal. She reached out to the stack of tarot cards on the dressing table and flipped the card at the top. The card depicted a goddess of justice sitting on a stone chair with a sword in one hand and a balance in the other, coldly watching everything. Backlund, Hillston Borough, in a house with a fireplace. "You've finished digesting your scribe potion?" Xiao had just changed into her home clothes when she heard the piece of unbelievable news upon walking back to the living room. Furs nodded with a haggard expression. "Yes. Do you know what kind of life I've been enduring recently?" As she was being forced to travel to 6 places in a consecutive manner, she had to experience, admire, and record the sights day and night. In addition, she would be pulled up above the gray fog, recording all kinds of strange or high-level beyond her powers. The lightning storm and the historical void summoning powers had been replaced several times. They had finally recovered their original setup today. "I don't know," Xiao answered honestly. "I know you don't know." Furs took a deep breath and said, "What about you? How have you been recently?" "Not too bad. It was arranged for me to preside over a paranormal court, and I had some thoughts about the acting principles. The speed at which the potion is being digested has increased," Xiao acknowledged. "I find it hard to imagine you wearing a judge's robe and sitting at the tribunal seat to judge." Furs sighed from the bottom of her heart. "Are you trying to say that the prisoners and lawyers won't be able to see me?" Xiao added, not minding it at all. Furs laughed dryly and said, "I'll need to have some rest to prepare my advancement ritual to become a traveler." "Don't you need to go deep into the spirit world? Do you have a way?" Xiao asked in puzzlement. Furs nodded and said, "That person asked me to summon his messenger." Chapter 1188 Thick-skinned Summon His Messenger. As judgment of the Tarot Club, as a member of MI9, Xiao understood what a messenger meant. Furthermore, she knew that the middle ranks of the numinous episcopate widely used messengers. Before she could ask for more details, she saw Furs walk towards the guest room on the first floor with her eyes vacant and footsteps listless. She said with an ethereal voice, "Let me sleep for a while. We can talk later." She slept all the way till the next morning, waking up thanks to the aroma of meat. "Desi pie?" Furs rubbed her eyes and walked out of the room. She saw that the table was already filled with food. "Yes." Xiao came out of the bathroom. "The one from the corner of the street." "It's not bad." Furs enthusiastically acknowledged and sat beside the dining table. She quickly picked up the desi pie and stuffed it into her mouth. After finishing one, she drank a mouthful of sweet iced tea and sighed in satisfaction. "This is life. Oh no, I forgot to brush my teeth." After she was done washing up, she finally regained her ability to think. She looked at Xiao in puzzlement and said, "Did MI9 not have any suspicions about how you secretly became a judge?" "They thought it was the remuneration that motivated me back then," Xiao informed her of what she had learned. Furs stroked her hair and said with a smile, "That's true. Let them ask the Church of Evernight." She covered her mouth and yawned. "I'm going to summon that messenger." After this period of recording, the way she addressed Klein had changed from Gairman Sparrow and Mr. World to that person. On the one hand, it was a form of respect, and on the other hand, she was afraid that someone would eavesdrop. Upon hearing her friend's words, Xiao looked around and asked in confusion, "Aren't you going to set up the ritual?" She remembered that summoning a messenger required a ritual. "That's only one of the methods. That person got me to use another method." Furs glanced at her clothes and realized that her clothes were all wrinkled since she hadn't had the time to change her clothes last night. Upon realizing that she would be meeting the messenger later, she decided to pay attention to her image. She hurriedly returned to the bedroom on the second floor and changed into a beige dress with frilly designs. After preparing herself, she raised her right hand in front of Xiao, and she grabbed at it as if she wanted to pull something out of the air. In her eyes, an illusory book took form. It quickly flipped and stopped at one of the pages. In the next second, her arms sank and a figure emerged from the void. This was Gehrman Sparrow, who was wearing a half-top hat and a black coat. He had a cold expression and an unyielding air, but his eyes appeared somewhat dull. "I succeeded. This is just my second attempt. I've only tried it once yesterday and failed." Furza's eyes widened as though they wanted to take in more light so as to see more clearly. She knew that this was the historical void projection she had summoned, so she wasn't too nervous. Instead, she held her breath and looked warily at Gehrman Sparrow's projection. She couldn't tell if he was real or fake. She still remembered the combat achievements of this crazy adventurer. Furs has actually summoned Gehrman Sparrow? Shouldn't it be his messenger? Would Gehrman Sparrow still be able to summon something? Questions popped up in Zio's mind. Just as Furs was unsure of what to do next, Gehrman Sparrow's eyes darted around slightly as his gaze instantly turned focused. He no longer had a rigid and vacant look, as though he was alive. Following that, he took out an exquisite, silvery harmonica and blew it. No sound came out of it, but the surroundings instantly turned cold as a biting wind stirred. Then, a woman dressed in a dark and complicated long dress with 4 blonde hair and red eyes in her hands walked out of the void. Her 8 eyes looked at Gehrman Sparrow. Gehrman Sparrow nodded slightly and pointed at Furs. "This lady needs to set up 4 special coordinates deep in the spirit world. Please help her." "All right," one of the heads of Rionette Tinker said as it moved up and down. Gehrman Sparrow didn't speak further. As he approached the window, he made the glove on his left hand become transparent. His figure quickly disappeared as he teleported out of the house. He left. He left just like that. The historical void projection I summoned left just like that? Furs stared with her mouth slightly open, as though she was experiencing a comical play. According to her understanding, the thing she summoned should be under her control. How could it leave after giving some instructions? Could it be that the historical void projection has the same personality as the actual person? No, it's as if Gehrman Sparrow himself had descended. Furs glanced at Zio and realized that she was just as confused as she was. At that moment, Furs suddenly shivered, as though an extremely terrifying creature was glaring at her. She subconsciously turned her head and realized that Gehrman Sparrow's messenger was looking at her with 8 red eyes, carefully observing her. As terrifying as Gehrman Sparrow. Furs forced a smile and said, "Sorry to trouble you." At this moment, Rionette Tinker's 4 blonde, red-eyed heads spoke one after another. "Need to pay 800 gold coins. There's still a fee?" Furs turned agape once again, at a loss for a response. After a few seconds, her thoughts suddenly became active as she began to calculate her savings. "After loaning £2,400 to Zio, I still have £780 left. My expenses recently have been quite high, but the royalties from my past novels are still being credited. Adding my other income and the £300 Zio returned me, I have a total of £1,258. That's enough." Furs immediately agreed, but she immediately discovered a problem. "Gold coins, all of them?" Rionette Tinker's 4 heads shook slightly. "Yes, you can, as expected, all of them need to be gold coins. I remember that Mr. World has been trying to gather gold coins in exchange for gold coins for quite some time before. It was to pay this messenger? The relationship between him and his messenger is really complicated. Mr. World should still have quite a few gold coins. I'll try to exchange 800 gold coins from him later." Furs secretly heaved a sigh of relief and said, "All right." After agreeing, Furs saw the headless messenger raise one of the heads in her hand to bite down on her clothes near her shoulder. The surrounding colors became saturated and brighter, the reds became redder, the blacks became blacker, and the whites became whiter. In such a manner, Furs was led by Rionette Tynker through similar scenes that she had no way of getting her bearings right. It didn't take long before she arrived at the spot where there was a faint fog. In the depths of the fog, one eye after another seemed to look over, but they quickly shrank back. When Furs summoned Gehrman Sparrow's projection from the historical void to Backlund, he had immediately entered the fog of history and dashed all the way to a period before the first epoch. His consciousness came alive within the projection, reducing Furs's spirituality expenditure. This way, Klein had indirectly returned to Backlund. This was also the reason why he had gotten Miss Magician to use such a complicated method to summon the messenger. As for the messenger summoned by the adventurer's harmonica, it was an independent existence, it didn't increase the burden on Furs's spirituality burden. Even if the historical void projection vanished, Rionette Tynker could still remain in the real world if she so wished. After a teleportation, Klein's figure appeared in a secluded alley near St. Samuel Cathedral. He then used his faceless powers to change his appearance and figure. During this process, although there were still a few pedestrians in the alley, they were affected by an illusion. They didn't notice a sudden companion appearing beside them. Right on the heels of that, Klein straightened his clothes, pressed down on his hat, and walked quickly to St. Samuel Cathedral. He found a seat to the side of the main prayer hall and sat down. After taking off his hat and chanting an honorific name, he sincerely drew a crimson moon on his chest. Then, he clasped his hands together, closed his eyes, and prayed softly to the Evernight goddess. I'm currently searching for traces of the dark demonic wolf's past to grasp his exact condition. At this point, he recalled that the dark demonic wolf might have been a former colleague of the Evernight goddess. They likely knew plenty about each other, as he quickly added, I wonder if you can give me some hints. He didn't wait for a response. Instead, he maintained a calm attitude and continued, after this matter is completed, I plan on heading all the way east to see if I can reach the western continent and see what state that place is in. I'll take this opportunity to escape Amon's pursuit and find other possibilities. After praying, he tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion and whispered, Praise the Lady. Just as he finished speaking, a dark night sky with countless stars suddenly appeared in front of him. A message unknowingly appeared in his mind. It was information regarding Black Demonic Wolf, Kotar. Klein was stunned for a moment. Only when the starry sky before him completely disappeared did he return to his senses. He sincerely praised the goddess once again. After leaving St. Samuel Cathedral, he used Creeping Hunger and another teleportation to arrive near the Holy Wind Cathedral located in Sherwood Borough. He wanted to pray to the Lord of Storms. He looked up at the towering steeple and felt some momentary hesitation. He really wasn't sure if he should enter the headquarters of the Church of the Lord of Storms in Backlund. I'm just a historical void projection. There's nothing to be afraid about. I won't suffer any losses from praying, but what if the Lord of Storms hears about the Amon situation and decides to bestow 0 to 32 to me? That way, I won't have to risk hunting the dark demonic wolf. A person should always be hopeful. After some thought, he finally made up his mind. He carefully raised his hand and summoned Anuni, the one who had yet to be parasitized by Amon, from the historical void to walk into the Holy Wind Cathedral in his own form. A minute or two later, a dark cloud suddenly appeared above Backlund. There seemed to be a flash of silver lightning in the Holy Wind Cathedral, but no one noticed it. Chapter 1189 Winter Gifts Day. As soon as the dark clouds in the sky dispersed, everything in the Holy Wind Cathedral returned to normal. In a nearby corner, Klein raised his hand to rub his forehead. The corners of his mouth twitched as he mumbled, If you don't want to give it to me, so be it. But why did you kill my marionette? He then took a deep breath before his figure rapidly faded away and disappeared. The time limit for maintaining the historical void projection was almost over. After all, a scribe's imitation of a high-level power had significant differences from the original version. The burden of a sequence 6 summoning a sequence 3 was rather heavy. Even if a scholar of your could transfer his consciousness over and reduce the spirituality expenditure, it was impossible for Furs to keep it up for too long. In the outskirts of Backlund, downstream of the Tussock River, Leonard hid his red gloves and slowly walked towards a certain spot. Suddenly, the slightly aged voice of Palaz Zoroast rang out in his mind. "How's your former colleague been doing recently?" Thinking back to the conversation at the Tarot Club, Leonard suppressed his voice and said, "He just avoided a trap set up by Amon's avatar. He's searching for the truth in the forsaken land of the gods." After listening to what he had to say, Palaz Zoroast didn't say another word and allowed Leonard to proceed forward. After setting up the special coordinates, Furs was thrown back into the real world by Gehrman Sparrow's messenger. "I feel exhausted, but I just woke up not too long ago. It must be that high-sequence Beyonder powers are too draining on my spirituality." Furs covered her mouth and yawned. She looked at Zio with a haggard expression. "That's possible." Zio agreed with her friend's judgment. Her intuition told her that the Gehrman Sparrow projection that had been summoned definitely wasn't simple. It could even be equivalent to a saint. After some hesitation, Zio said, "Sleep a little longer. Don't attempt to advance in such a state. In one of my previous trials, the murderer was mentally psychotic. He would deliberately make his friends, his students, and the tramps he took in, consume potions in all sorts of negative states, watch them lose control, and mutate into all kinds of monsters, disgusting and terrifying ones." What was this fellow's goal? Furs was stunned for a second. 2 goals. One was to observe whether the same potion caused the same loss of control on different people. The other was to use oil paintings to record the corresponding scenes. He believed that the madness, the pain, and the distortion had an unparalleled beauty, one that can stimulate his greatest creative passion. Zio recalled the trial from back then. She felt a sense of hatred and lingering fear. He was a complete lunatic. That fellow should be executed. Furs couldn't help but shudder when she imagined it. She bared her teeth and said, "Was he a cultist?" Perhaps, but there were no clues. On the surface, he appeared to be an outstanding artist, and he is very famous internationally. If it wasn't for more than 5 of his students and friends who had disappeared over the past few years, attracting our attention, then he might have had to wait until he completely went mad and lost control, becoming a monster, before this matter would be discovered. Zio suddenly paused for a moment before saying, "Back then, everyone in the law enforcement team that opened his hidden basement vomited. There were all kinds of mutated and terrifying corpses, and hanging overhead were all kinds of harrowing yet charming oil paintings. A hateful fellow, but it's also a very attractive story." Furs thought for a moment and pressed, "Was he a devil?" "No, he's a psychiatrist." Zio rejected her friend's guess. "You sentenced him to death?" Furs asked in anticipation. Zio shook her head. "His defense lawyer convinced me that he's more suited to be a sealed artifact researcher." "There's a lawyer? You have lawyers at the paranormal court? Isn't it all a direct trial?" Furs asked in surprise. Zio straightened her blonde hair and said, "There are some Beyonders from the lawyer pathway among us who also need to act. Of course, they don't know that they're acting." "All right." Furs yawned again and pointed to the reclining chair beside the fireplace. "I'll sleep for a while." Don't you have work?" "We can take days off," Zio replied succinctly. Furs didn't ask further as she walked to the fireplace and collapsed into it. About 2 to 3 hours later, she woke up and cogitated for 15 minutes. Following that, she found the Traveler Beyonder characteristic and the supplementary ingredients given to her by her teacher, Dorian Gray Abraham, and concocted a potion bottle. The potion's color was white but transparent. It was like half-melted snow water, occasionally producing light green bubbles. Furs held the potion and glanced at her friend who was on guard by the side. She smiled and said, "If I lose control, don't hesitate. Just chop off my head." "No, pray first. There might still be a chance to save me." Xiao slowly nodded. "Maintain this state." Furs silently exhaled. Without any hesitation, she raised the bottle and gulped it down. In the blink of an eye, she felt her body and her eyes light up one after another. They blasted around her body and opened one illusory door after another. Furs's consciousness couldn't help but enter one of them. Her entire body turned transparent as she vanished. In such a chaotic state of mind, Furs nearly couldn't regain her sense of self-awareness. Thankfully, she had her fair share of being tormented recently and had a strong will. Furthermore, from time to time, she could feel the 4 special coordinates in the spirit world. Finally, she slowly came to her senses. After an unknown period of time, she realized that she had already entered the depths of the spirit world. It was difficult to tell her exact location, and she couldn't find her way back. With the help of the 4 special coordinates, Furs slowly traversed back to a familiar spot, leaving the saturated, stacked colors and the thin fog before walking out of the spirit world. The 4 special coordinates weren't only used to help me find a way back, they can also effectively maintain my self-awareness. Teacher is only a sequence 7, so without any actual experience, it's inevitable for him to miss out on such knowledge. As Furs thought, she cast her gaze toward Xiao and smiled slightly. "I'm a traveler." Xiao heaved a sigh of relief and asked curiously, "What new Beyonder powers did you get?" "The main one is teleportation. Also, invisible hand. In addition, the number of demigod-level Beyonder powers I can record has increased to 4. The actual effects should be close to that of a sequence 4, Furs examined herself. She then raised her hand and pulled out a tarot card from across the room, one used for divination. It was a person with a scepter in his right hand that pointed towards the sky. His left hand pointed to the earth. In front of him were people like the Holy Grail, a scepter, a sword, star coins, the magician card. Every year's longest night was the birthday of the Evernight goddess, commonly known as the Winter Gifts Day. On this day, all Evernight believers would head to a nearby cathedral to witness the sunset of the sun. When night fell, they would participate in Mass, enjoy a holy meal, listen to the hymns, and do all sorts of activities. The year 1350 for Lone's Evernight believers was a very heavy year. The intensity of the war and the cost of items had made them lose the good mood they had. However, on Winter Gifts Day, they still came out of their houses. This was because the Church of Evernight was going to hold a massive mass in the various large public squares to placate the souls that had passed away. At the same time, many foundations would distribute food vouchers at the Massachusetts. People who received them could be able to obtain the corresponding items in any of the relief points or cathedrals. This led to Storm and Steam believers who didn't celebrate Winter Gifts Day to head for the nearest square. Westboro, Memorial Square, where George III was blasted to death. Dressed in a black cloak while walking her golden retriever, Susie, with a leather bag on her back, Audrey walked among the nobles looking refined. Her expression didn't seem abnormal, but she hid some pain and guilt. She had obtained the blood of an elderly mine dragon. After concocting the manipulator potion, she placed it in the small bag Susie was carrying. Susie was already a Sequence 6 hypnotist. She believed that not many people present would notice her abnormality and snatch things from her. The blood of the elderly mine dragon came from the hermit Catlia. Apparently, she had obtained it from Queen Mystic, and she had paid £3,000 for it. This was in line with her expectations, as she didn't really want to obtain the ingredients from the psychology alchemists. After all, her direct superior, Vin Rambus, had only died a few months ago. To collect the items needed for an advancement, it made it inevitable for people to suspect her. As for the other members of the psychology alchemists, they had the ability and intelligence to notice this point. Besides, after becoming a demigod, one has to come into contact with the psychology alchemist's counselors. According to Mr. World, there might be an angel from the mind domain hidden amongst them. I'll continue making preparations. With a suitable opportunity and excuse, I'll consider raising my position in the organization. I'll hide my strength for now. The blonde Audrey lifted the ends of her skirt slightly and slowly walked towards her predetermined spot. Along the way, many nobles extended their hands to her in a friendly manner, hoping to help this beautiful, noble, and weak young lady through the crowd. However, these were all blocked by Earl Hall. He got his eldest son, Hibbert, to be in charge of his youngest daughter while he held his wife's arm and walked ahead. From time to time, he would turn back to look at the most dazzling jewel of Backlund. Not long after their family arrived at their destination, the Church of Evernight's Bishop of the Backlund Diocese, St. Anthony Stevens, walked up to the high platform in his black robe with red patterns. He looked around, raised his right hand, and tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion. Praise the Lady. When the believers below responded, this saint's deep voice could be heard by everyone. Today is the celebration of the night, but the goddess's response is pity. She takes pity on every mother who has lost her child. She takes pity on every lonely child. And she takes pity on everyone who has suffered immense pain. She said that all of this will end. All the suffering will return to silence and repose. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.